What started as a perfect summer day at Lake Newell, a family picnic filled with laughter and sunshine, quickly unraveled into every parent's worst nightmare. 11-year-old Tom, full of life and endless energy, had been playing by the water, promising to stay close. But in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Was it the deep waters that swallowed him, or was there something else lurking beneath the lake's calm surface? As panic set in and the search began, I realized that this wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the beginning of a mystery I might never escape. What really happened that day at Lake Newell? Listen on if you dare. The Tragedy at Lake Newell by Craig Groshek. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Part 1. I remember everything about the day at Lake Newell. The way the sun gleamed off the water, the shouts of laughter echoing through the park, and the bright colors of picnic blankets sprawled across the grass. It was supposed to be the perfect day, the last family outing of the summer before school started again. I was looking forward to it, even though I'd never been big on family picnics. But that day, well, that day was different. Tom had been excited since we pulled into the parking lot, practically bouncing out of the car as soon as the doors unlocked. He was always like that, full of energy, always smiling. It was hard not to get swept up in his enthusiasm. As the youngest of our cousins, he had a way of making everything feel more alive, like seeing the world through a different lens. When he darted off toward the shore with his flip-flops slapping against his heels, I knew I'd be spending the day chasing after him, just like always. "Tom, wait up," I called, but he didn't stop, his small figure already disappearing among the other kids running along the beach. I shook my head and jogged after him, trying to keep him in sight. The lake was crowded that day, the shore dotted with families, children, and couples lounging on blankets or grilling hot dogs. It felt safe, like nothing bad could ever happen in a place like this. By the time I reached the shoreline, Tom was already at the water's edge, kicking up sand as he waded into the shallows. He turned and waved at me, his grin so wide it looked like it might split his face in two. I couldn't help but smile back. "Hey, stay where I can see you," I called, stopping a few feet short of the water. Well, I hated how protective I sounded, but I couldn't help it. He was just a kid who couldn't swim well, no matter how much he begged to go in deeper. "I'm fine, Ellie," he insisted, rolling his eyes in that way only an 11-year-old can. He stuck out his tongue, then splashed around a little, staying close to the shore. "See? I'm not even going past the line." He gestured to the faded rope that marked the end of the shallow area, where the lifeguards usually set up their posts on busy weekends. Today, though, the rope just sagged there, useless and unattended. I glanced around uneasily, noticing that most of the lifeguards were focused on a group of rowdy teenagers further down the beach. I made a mental note to keep an eye on Tom. He loved testing boundaries, and the last thing we needed was for him to drift into deeper water without anyone noticing. "Okay, but no going out past your waist," I said firmly, squinting against the sunlight that reflected off the lake's surface. "Promise?" "Promise," Tom called back, then promptly turned and splashed farther out, his shorts already soaked and clinging to his skinny legs. I sighed, shaking my head. Watching him play, I could almost forget my worries, almost relax into the laughter and sunlight. It was a good day, a perfect day really. Well, if only I'd known what was coming. The rest of the family was scattered around the picnic area, setting up food and drinks. My mum and Aunt Sarah were fussing over the grill, arguing about whether the hot dogs were done, while my dad and Uncle James talked football, gesturing wildly as they debated their fantasy league picks. The air smelled of charcoal and sunscreen, and the breeze off the lake was cool against my skin. I sat down on the edge of our blanket, keeping one eye on Tom and the other on my phone as I scrolled through a stream of mindless updates. Every so often I'd glance up, making sure I could still see his dark hair bobbing above the water. He'd dip his head under it for a few seconds and then pop back up, shaking his head like a wet puppy. Once or twice I caught his eye, and he'd wave again, a cheeky smile on his face. It made me laugh, but there was always a part of me that stayed on edge. Just a small part, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me not to let him out of my sight. But I did. "Hey, Ellie, come help me with these skewers," Mom called from the picnic table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I hesitated, glancing back at the water. "Hey, Tom, stay where I can see you," I shouted. He didn't answer, but I saw him splash closer to a group of kids who were building a sandcastle on the shore. Reluctantly, I stood and turned away. "I'm coming," I grumbled, heading over to the picnic table. The adults were bustling around, setting out plastic plates and napkins, talking and laughing. It was loud, chaotic, and for a few minutes I got lost in the commotion, handing skewers and running back and forth to the cooler. When I finally looked back, Tom was gone. It happened so quickly. One second he was there, his head bobbing in the water, his laughter carrying over the lake, and the next he wasn't. I squinted, scanning the beach, the water, the groups of kids playing along the shore, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Tom?" I called, my voice sharp with sudden fear. I stepped closer to the water's edge, craning my neck, hoping to catch a glimpse of his dark hair. "Tom!" The lake seemed to stretch out forever, the water glittering innocently in the afternoon light. I ran along the shore, my eyes darting from one group of children to another, my heart pounding. Where was he? He couldn't have gone far. He couldn't. "Have you seen Tom?" I asked a little girl digging in the sand. She looked up at me with wide eyes and shook her head. Panic clawed at my throat as I turned back to the picnic area. "Mom!" I shouted, my voice high and desperate. "I can't find Tom." Everything seemed to slow down as my words registered. The adults turned, their expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Aunt Sarah dropped the plate she was holding, her face paling. "What do you mean you can't find him?" she demanded, already rushing toward the shore. I stumbled after her, scanning the water, the beach, everywhere. "He was just here," I stammered, feeling sick. "He was right here. Tom?" Aunt Sarah screamed, cupping her hands around her mouth as she sprinted along the shoreline. "Tom, where are you?" My stomach dropped as the realization hit me like a wave of ice water. Tom was gone. 1 second I'd looked away, 1 second I'd let my guard down, and now he was nowhere. Part 2. The chaos that followed was a blur of shouts and frantic movement. My aunt and uncle ran up and down the shore, calling Tom's name over and over again, their voices rising in pitch with each unanswered shout. Family members scattered, searching the picnic area, the playground, the parking lot, anywhere he might have wandered off to. But there was no sign of him. I ran with them, my heart hammering, my throat dry as sandpaper. Every few seconds I'd turn and look at the water, feeling an icy dread creeping up my spine. The lake looked the same as it always did, calm, inviting, glistening under the late afternoon sun. But now it seemed different. The water's surface shimmered mockingly as if hiding a secret. "Tom!" I screamed, ignoring the stares of strangers. I tore through the crowd, pushing past families packing up their picnics and kids with dripping ice cream cones. "Tom, where are you?" "Maybe he's hiding somewhere," Dad said, but his voice was tight with worry. He jogged alongside me, his eyes scanning the clusters of people lounging on the sand. Kids do that sometimes, right? And they hide to get attention. "He wouldn't do that," I insisted, swallowing back the panic that threatened to choke me. Tom wasn't a mischievous kid. He liked to show off, sure, but he'd never go far without telling someone, especially me. "Ellie, come look over here," my cousin Megan called, waving frantically from the playground. "Maybe he's on the slides." I ran over, nearly tripping on the hem of my jeans. But there was no one on the playground but a few toddlers toddling around under the watchful eyes of their parents. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the park, my eyes darting back to the lake again and again. No, 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 I muttered under my breath. This couldn't be happening. It was just a stupid game of hide and seek. Any second now, he'd pop out from behind a tree giggling like he always did, and I'd yell at him for scaring me. Deep down, I knew. Something was wrong. Tom wouldn't hide like this, not for this long. Not with everyone screaming his name. Ellie! My mum's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp with fear. She was standing by the water's edge, her phone pressed at her ear. I'm calling 911. I want you to stay here, okay? What if he's in the lake? I blurted out, my voice breaking. I pointed to the water, my hand shaking. What if he went out too far and he... Don't say that, Mum snapped, and then softened. She reached out, gripping my shoulders, her gaze piercing. We're going to find him, okay? He's around here somewhere. Just stay with your dad and don't leave the shoreline. But I could see it in her eyes. The fear, the doubt. And that was when the dread in my chest turned to something darker. Something heavy and suffocating that settled like a stone in my gut. My gaze drifted back to the lake, to the soft ripples where Tom had been playing just minutes ago. Please, please be okay, I whispered, barely aware of the tears burning down my cheeks. The next few minutes were a blur. Tom was shouting into the phone, giving the dispatcher every detail she could think of. Tom's height, his weight, his dark hair, the blue Spider-Man swim trunks he loved so much. I could hear her voice shaking as she begged for help, her gaze never leaving the water. 6 years old, is that what you said? The dispatcher asked. No, 11, Mom corrected, her voice breaking. He's 11, but he's small for his age. He looks younger. Please, you have to send someone right away. He's been missing for... She glanced at her watch, and I saw her face go pale. It's been over 20 minutes. 20 minutes. My heart stuttered. Had it really been that long? It felt like seconds. A few frantic seconds since I'd looked away, since I'd turned my back on him for one careless moment. Right, they're sending a team, Mum said quietly, lowering the phone. She looked around, her eyes wild and desperate. Where's Sarah? I followed her gaze and saw Aunt Sarah stumbling along the shoreline, her face white as a sheet. She was clutching Tom's towel, crumpled and still damp from when he'd been splashing around just a little while ago. Oh, it looked so small in her hands, so fragile. Tom, she screamed, her voice raw and ragged. Tom, please answer me. Uncle James grabbed her, pulling her back as she started wading into the lake. Sarah, stop. You can't. She's in there, she sobbed, struggling against him. I know he's in there. I can feel it. Let me go. Sarah, you have to stay here, he pleaded, his own voice shaking. The divers are coming. Well, they'll find him. We can't. His voice broke, and for a moment I saw the same terror in his eyes that I felt in my own chest. I stumbled back, clutching my arms around myself, my mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. Tom couldn't be gone, not like this. He was probably hiding somewhere. He had to be. But with every second that passed, every fruitless search around the park, hope seemed to drain away, replaced by a suffocating sense of dread. A few minutes later, the rescue teams arrived. Police officers, paramedics, and a crew of divers in dark wetsuits that made my stomach twist. They moved with grim efficiency, setting up a perimeter and clearing the area around the lake. A few officers ushered us away from the water, asking if anyone had seen Tom go under, if we knew exactly where he'd been playing. No, he was right here, Aunt Sarah cried, pointing to the shallows. He was playing in the shallow water, and then I looked away and... It's okay, ma'am, the officer said softly, taking notes. We're going to find him. Just try to stay calm. Stay calm? How could we stay calm when Tom was out there alone, scared, maybe hurt? My legs felt like they might give out. I stared at the water, my hands shaking, feeling like I might throw up. What's happening? A voice piped up beside me. I turned and saw Lily, Tom's little sister, clutching her mother's leg, her eyes wide and confused. She couldn't be more than 5, with the same dark hair and round face as Tom. She looked up at me, and I forced a smile that felt brittle and fake. We're looking for Tom, I said softly, kneeling beside her. He might have gone exploring, so we're just trying to find him. Why? She asked, frowning. Is he hiding? Yeah, I lied, swallowing hard. Yeah, he's hiding. She didn't look convinced, but before I could say more, the divers were wading into the water, their figures dark and ominous against the shimmering lake. My heart plummeted as I watched them submerge, their faces grim. Please, I whispered, hugging myself tightly. Please find him. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park. The laughter and chatter of the other families had faded away, replaced by the tense murmur of the search crews. They were moving in a wide arc, their flashlights flickering across the surface as they combed the lake. But there was no sign of Tom. Not even a ripple. Part 3. The sun had almost gone by the time they found him. I was standing by the shoreline, my feet buried in the sand, when I saw the first diver surface. He raised one arm and waved, a slow, deliberate signal that seemed to freeze the entire world. The lake was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. My heart clenched painfully in my chest. Then another diver appeared, and between them I saw a small, limp form being lifted out of the water. Tom! Aunt Sarah screamed, her voice breaking the stillness. She surged forward, but Uncle James grabbed her, holding her back as she fought against him. No, let me go, let me... I couldn't breathe. The world tilted around me and I felt myself stumbling forward, my legs moving without my permission. I had to see him, I had to know. The crowd parted as I pushed through, the murmurs and cries around me blending into a dull roar. All I could see was Tom, small and fragile, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his face pale and slack. The divers lifted him onto the shore and laid him gently on the sand. His Spider-Man swim trunks were still clinging to his legs, soaked and muddy. Oh, the sight of them, of those bright red and blue shorts, made something inside me shatter. He'd been so proud of them, showing them off to everyone at the picnic that morning. Look, Ellie, he'd said, tugging at the waistband and grinning up at me. Aren't they cool? I can swim faster now, like Spider-Man. Yeah, buddy, they're super cool, I'd said, ruffling his hair. But you still need to stay where I can see you, okay? And now... Oof. Tom, I whispered, falling to my knees beside him. My hands hovered over his body, trembling, afraid to touch him. I looked so small, so still. There was no rise and fall of his chest, no flicker of movement in his eyelids. Just silence. Just emptiness. No. Aunt Sarah sobbed, collapsing beside me. Her fingers dug into the sand, clutching at it as if she could somehow hold on to him, keep him from slipping away. Please, not my baby, please. The paramedics pushed through the crowd, their faces set in grim, practiced lines. They knelt beside Tom, their hands moving quickly as they checked his pulse, his breathing. But I could see it in their eyes. They knew, just like I did. It's been too long, one of them murmured softly, shaking his head. We'll try CPR, but... Try, Aunt Sarah shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. Please, just try. The paramedics nodded and set to work, their movements swift and efficient. I watched in numb horror as they began chest compressions, their hands pressing down rhythmically on his small chest. Each push jolted his body, making his head bob slightly with every motion. I looked wrong. All of it looked so horribly, terribly wrong. Come on, buddy. Another of the paramedics murmured under his breath. Come on, stay with us. But Tom didn't move. He didn't respond. His skin was pale, tinged with blue, and the water that poured from his mouth with each compression was murky and dark. A hand touched my shoulder, and I looked up to see my mom standing beside me, her face streaked with tears. Ellie, she whispered, her voice tight with grief. Sweetie, come here. You shouldn't. I have to stay, I choked out, shrugging her off. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't. This was my fault. I'd promised to watch him to keep him safe. And I hadn't. I hadn't done anything. The paramedics kept working, but I could see the strain in their movements, the looks they exchanged. After what felt like forever, I heard the wail of an ambulance approaching. The paramedics didn't stop. They just lifted Tom onto a gurney, strapping him down with careful, practiced hands, as if moving him gently could somehow make a difference. Let's go, one of them called, and I watched, paralyzed, as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. Aunt Sarah tried to follow, but the paramedics blocked her path. Ma'am, we need space to work, one of them said firmly. We'll be taking him to St. Margaret's Hospital. You can follow behind. Please, she sobbed, clutching her husband's arm. Please, take care of him. Please bring him back. We'll do everything we can, the paramedic said quietly, then slammed the door shut. The ambulance roared to life, its sirens piercing the night. I stood there, watching as it sped away, the lights flashing red and blue against the trees. Everything felt unreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. They're going to save him, right? I whispered, turning to Mom. My voice sounded small and childlike, as if it belonged to someone else. Ellie? She pulled me close, her arms tight around me. Sweetie, I don't know. Dad was already packing up our things, moving in jerky, frantic motions. Come on, we have to go, he said roughly, shoving the cooler into the back of the car. We need to be there. Let's go. But before we could even gather our things, Aunt Sarah's phone rang. She fumbled for it, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Hello? She gasped, clutching it to her ear. Hello, is he... I watched as the color drained from her face. She swayed, her eyes widening in horror. The phone slipped from her fingers and fell to the sand. No, she whispered, staring at nothing. No. Uncle James caught her as she crumpled, her body shaking with silent sobs. Sarah, he murmured, his voice hoarse. What did they say? He's gone. She breathed, her gaze unfocused, as if she couldn't believe the words. They couldn't. Uncle James's face twisted, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as she broke down. His own shoulders shook, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. I stood there, numb, my heart hammering in my chest. Gone. Well, the word echoed in my head, dull and heavy. Gone. The tears came then, hot and blinding, spilling down my face. I turned away, stumbling down the beach, needing to get away, needing to breathe. The world seemed to close in around me, suffocating me, crushing me. Ellie, Mum called, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't look at them. I couldn't face what had just happened. Tom was gone, and I hadn't saved him. The house was dark and still when we got home. I drifted through the front door in a daze, my eyes red and swollen, my chest tight with a pain that wouldn't ease. Everything looked the same. Our cozy living room, the pictures on the walls, the soft glow of the kitchen light. But it felt wrong, like a dream that didn't make sense, or a nightmare that I couldn't escape. You want something to eat? Mum asked quietly, her voice thin and strained. I shook my head, dropping my bag by the door. "No." "Okay," she whispered. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to Dad, who stood by the sink, staring blankly out of the window. "Maybe you should get some rest." "I'm not tired." And that wasn't true. I was exhausted. I was so tired I felt like I could collapse right there on the floor and never get up again. But the thought of sleeping, of closing my eyes and seeing his face, still and lifeless, made me want to scream. I'm gonna go up to my room," I murmured, turning away. My feet felt like lead as I trudged up the stairs, the silence pressing in around me. I closed my bedroom door and stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. The darkness seemed to pulse, heavy and suffocating. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, looping back to that moment by the lake. The sight of his body, so small and pale and limp, being pulled from the water. The sound of Aunt Sarah's screams. The look in Uncle James's eyes when he realized. Well, I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath hitching. I couldn't do this. I couldn't. A soft sound broke the silence. My eyes snapped open, my heart stuttering in my chest. When it was faint, barely more than a whisper, but I knew it. A wet sloshing sound, like something dripping onto the floor. I turned slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. There, by the window, stood a small, shadowy figure. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The room seemed to tilt around me, the walls closing in. It couldn't be. It couldn't. "Tom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Well, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, its outline hazy and indistinct, its head cocked slightly to the side. Water dripped from its body, darkening the carpet beneath it, each drop echoing loudly in the stillness of my room. "Tom?" I whispered again, my voice barely more than a breath. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and sharp and biting. I could see him more clearly now, the outline of his shoulders, the dark shape of his hair plastered flat against his skull. He looked, well, wrong, like blurred, as if I was seeing him through fogged glass. And there, just visible in the pale light from the street lamp outside, his eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I took a step back, my legs trembling. I should have run, should have screamed, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my gaze locked with his. "Tom," I murmured, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But the words dried up in my throat as the figure shifted. His head tilted a fraction more, as if he were listening, as if he were waiting. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt my heart stutter painfully in my chest. What did he want? Why was he here? I thought of that moment by the lake, of his pale face peering up at me from beneath the water. Oh, the emptiness in his eyes, the way he just stared. "Tom, I'm sorry," I said again, my voice cracking. I didn't mean to." The figure moved. I sucked in a breath, stumbling back as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. The carpet squelched under his bare feet, dark stains spreading outward like ink. He took another step, then another, each one slow and methodical, the water dripping from his clothes in a steady, rhythmic patter. "Please," I whispered, holding up a hand as if it could somehow stop him. "Please, don't." But he kept coming, his gaze never leaving mine. My back hit the wall and I pressed myself against it, my heart hammering wildly. Oh, he was so close now, close enough that I could see the water pooling around his feet, the way his hair clung to his forehead in dark, slick strands. "Tom, what do you want?" I breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Wait, why are you—" He stopped. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. Standing just a few feet away now, his head tilted up slightly, his eyes boring into mine. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. And then, slowly, so slowly I almost didn't see it, he raised one hand. I flinched, pressing back harder against the wall. His fingers twitched, then stretched out, reaching toward me. But not in anger, not in accusation. It was a gesture I knew all too well, one I'd seen 1,000 times before, whenever he was scared, whenever he wanted comfort. His hand was trembling. "Tom," I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to reach out to take his hand, to tell him everything would be okay. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped between terror and heartbreak. Oh, what was happening? Was this really him? Or was it something else? Something dark and twisted wearing his face? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Tom, please, just tell me what you want. I'll do anything. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, his hand still outstretched, his eyes still locked on mine. And the silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, till I thought I might scream. And then, without a word, he lowered his hand. My heart lurched painfully. For a split second, I thought he might disappear, might dissolve back into the darkness like he had at the lake. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring at me with those wide, empty eyes. Then slowly, he began to turn. "Wait!" I cried, reaching out instinctively. But he didn't stop. He took a step back, then another, his form blurring and fading as he moved toward the corner of the room. "Tom, wait, please, don't go!" I stumbled forward, my hand outstretched. "Please!" But it was too late. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. The room was empty again, the only sound the soft drip, drip, drip of the water onto the carpet. I stood there, gasping for breath, my heart racing, my body trembling. What had just happened? "Tom," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Tom, are you still here?" But there was no answer, no flicker of movement in the shadows, just the faint scent of lake water lingering in the air. I sank to my knees, the tears spilling over, hot and bitter. What did he want? Why was he here? Was it really him or just something else, something that looked like him? "Tom," I sobbed, clutching at my arms. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Part 4. The church was packed, the pews filled with somber faces and bowed heads. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and incense, mingling with the low murmur of hushed voices. I stood near the front, beside my parents, staring blankly at the closed casket draped in flowers. It didn't seem real. None of it did. People drifted in and out of focus. Distant relatives, neighbors, classmates from Tom's elementary school, each one pausing by the casket to murmur their condolences, to whisper broken words of sympathy to Aunt Sarah and Uncle James. I barely heard them. It was like I was moving through water, everything distorted and sluggish. I glanced up at the framed picture of Tom on top of the casket. It was one of his favorites, the one where he was beaming up at the camera, wearing his football jersey, his dark hair sticking up in wild tufts. I remembered that day. Oh, he'd been so excited, running around the yard pretending to score touchdowns. He's going to be a pro. Uncle James had joked, ruffling Tom's hair. Just you wait. But Tom would never play football again. He'd never join the school band. He'd never get to show off his Spider-Man swim trunks, never laugh or argue or chase his little sister around the yard. Everything he was, everything he could have been, was gone. Ellie, sweetie, are you okay? Mum's voice was soft and strained. She reached out, squeezing my hand gently, and I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I whispered, though it felt like a lie. I wasn't okay. I wasn't even close. I hadn't slept in days, haunted by images of his lifeless body in the sand, of his pale face staring up at me from beneath the water. And that night, the night he'd come to me. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Why had he appeared to me? What did he want it? Why did I feel like he was here? Excuse me, I murmured, stepping away from my mom. She looked up, startled, but I was already moving, weaving through the crowd toward the back of the church. I needed air. I needed space. I needed time to think. The whispers followed me as I slipped past rows of people, soft murmurs of pity and curiosity, of confusion and grief. I ignored them, keeping my gaze fixed on the exit. And as I passed the casket, I felt a strange sensation wash over me, an icy shiver that prickled down my spine, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stopped, my heart skipping a beat. Slowly I turned, staring down at the closed lid of the casket. Nothing moved, nothing changed, but the air around me felt different, thicker, heavier. Ellie? I jumped, spinning around. It was Lily, standing a few feet away, clutching her mother's hand. Her eyes were wide and solemn, her face pale beneath her dark hair. What are you doing? She asked softly, tilting her head. Why are you sad? I swallowed, struggling for words. What could I possibly say to her? How could I explain what I didn't understand myself? I miss him, I whispered finally, my voice trembling. I miss Tom. Lily's gaze shifted to the casket, her brow furrowing slightly. But he's right there, she murmured, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He's standing right next to you. My breath caught, my pulse spiking painfully. I glanced around, my eyes darting to the space beside me. There was no one there, just empty air, a faint draft brushing against my skin. What do you mean? I breathed, my heart pounding. Lily just shrugged, her gaze drifting away as if she'd lost interest. He's always there, she said simply. He likes to watch. My mouth went dry and I felt my legs wobble beneath me. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Could she really see him? Or was this just her way of coping, her way of making sense of losing her brother? Lily, honey, come on, Aunt Sarah murmured, pulling her daughter gently away. She glanced at me, her face drawn and hollow. You okay, Ellie? You need to sit down. No, I said quickly, shaking my head. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. I wasn't fine at all. Aunt Sarah hesitated, her gaze lingering on me, and then nodded slowly. If you need anything, just let me know, okay? Okay, I whispered, forcing a smile. At the moment they turned away, the smile faded, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. Lily's words echoed in my mind. He's right here. He likes to watch. I turned back to the casket, my breath catching in my throat. The framed photo seemed to stare back at me, Tom's eyes bright and mischievous. But the longer I looked, the more I felt it. The sensation of being watched, of something hovering just to the edge of my vision. Slowly, I took a step back, and then another. My pulse was racing, my thoughts spinning in frantic panic circles. He was here. He was right here. But why? Why couldn't I see him? And why was he still waiting? A faint sound reached my ears, so soft I almost didn't notice it. The distant drip, drip, drip of water hitting the floor. When my heart stopped, I glanced around searching for the source, but no one else seemed to hear it. The people around me murmured quietly, heads bowed, hands clasped in prayer. No one was looking at me, no one noticed. But I noticed. The sound was coming from the base of the casket. My breath hitched, my chest tightening painfully, and slowly I stepped forward, my gaze fixed on the polished wood. There at the base, a small dark stain was spreading outward, one tiny drop at a time. Drip, drip, drip. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head. I was imagining it. I had to be. When I opened my eyes again, the stain was gone. I gasped, stumbling back. My heart was racing, my mind reeling. What was happening? What did it mean? Was I losing my mind, or was it really him? Ellie? Sweetie? Mum's voice broke through my thoughts, soft and worried. She was standing beside me again, her brow creased with concern. Are you okay? I glanced back at the casket, my skin prickling. The stain was gone. The air was still, everything looked normal. Except it wasn't. It wasn't normal at all. I need to go home, I whispered, turning away. I need to go. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I was already walking, my footsteps quick and unsteady. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Art 5. Back home, the house felt suffocatingly quiet. I sat curled up on my bed, staring blankly at the wall. The funeral had drained me, physically, mentally, emotionally. But every time I tried to close my eyes, the same images flashed in my mind. Tom's small body lying lifeless on the shore, his framed photograph on top of the casket, and that dark stain spreading at its base, like water seeping from somewhere deep and hidden. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I wrapped my arms around my knees, shivering despite the thick comforter pulled tightly around me. The house was dark and still, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboard settling. My parents were asleep down the hall, exhausted and silent. I hadn't told them what I'd seen. What I thought I'd seen. Well, they wouldn't believe me. Barely believed it myself. But something was wrong. I knew it. I could feel it, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Tom was here. I didn't know how or why, but he was still somewhere. He likes to watch. Lily's words echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting back the panic that threatened to swallow me whole. Was he really here in the house, watching me? Why, or what did he want? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. A soft thump broke the silence. I jerked upright, my heart lurching painfully. The sound had come from downstairs. I held my breath, straining to listen. For a long moment, there was only silence. And then, slowly, I heard it. The faint, almost imperceptible creak of footsteps on the stairs. My blood ran cold. I shot a glance at the clock, 2:15 a.m. No one should be awake. My parents were heavy sleepers, and the only other people in the house were... I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. Tom. I slid out of bed, my bare feet brushing against the cold, hardwood floor. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pull the covers over my head and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see. Slowly I crept to the door, easing it open with just enough to peer into the dark hallway. The floorboards outside my room gleamed faintly in the moonlight, empty and still. I hesitated, my heart pounding, then slipped out into the hall, my footsteps soft and silent. I moved toward the stairs, every nerve in my body tingling with fear. The darkness seemed thicker here, pressing in around me, making it hard to see. I squinted, trying to make out the bottom of the staircase. Had I really heard something, or was I just imagining things? A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I froze. There at the base of the stairs, a small, pale figure stood, half hidden in the shadows. I sucked in a breath, my heart leaping into my throat. It was him. I knew it was him. "Tom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure shifted, stepping slightly into the pale moonlight streaming through the front window. My breath caught in my throat. It was Tom, his small frame soaked and dripping, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't say anything, he just stared at me, his gaze intense, his head tilted slightly to the side. "Tom?" I breathed, taking a step down. Is it really you?" He didn't move, didn't speak, but as I stared down at him, I saw it. The dark water dripping steadily from his hair, pooling around his bare feet. Same stain I'd seen at the funeral, the same cold, wet scent that lingered in the air. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice tight with fear. What do you want?" Again, he didn't respond. He just stood there watching me with that same blank, empty expression. A shiver ran down my spine once more, and I hugged my arms around myself, trembling. This wasn't right. It didn't feel right. I mean, it looked like Tom. It was Tom, but there was something else, something strange and unsettling about the way he stood there, so still and silent. "Please," I murmured, my voice barely more than a breath. "Please, just say something." But he didn't. He didn't move. He just kept watching me, his eyes dark and empty. And then, slowly, so slowly I almost didn't see it, he raised one hand. I flinched, my heart racing. His fingers twitched and then stretched out, pointing down the hallway. I followed his gaze, my pulse pounding in my ears. There at the end of the hall, my bedroom door stood ajar, and from within I saw it. A soft, pale glow, flickering faintly in the darkness. "What?" I breathed, taking a step back. "What is that?" Tom didn't answer. He just stood there, his hand still outstretched, his gaze fixed on the faint, ghostly light emanating from my room. I turned, staring at the glow. It pulsed softly, like the steady beat of a heart, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I'd never seen anything like it, and yet there was something familiar about it, something that tugged at the edges of my memory, sending a chill through my veins. I glanced back at Tom, my breath hitching. He was watching me again, his eyes wide and unblinking, waiting. You want me to go in there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, didn't move, but I knew, I could feel it. He wanted me to follow him, he wanted me to see. Slowly I turned and took a step toward the glow, my heart pounding wildly. Each step felt like a lifetime, my body tense and shaking. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the door, and pushed it open wider. The glow brightened, flaring up for a split second before dimming again. I took a deep breath, my pulse racing, and I stepped inside. The room was empty, dark, but there in the center of the floor, a wet footprint glistened faintly in the pale light. My heart stopped. I stared down at the print, my mind spinning. Well, the shape was distinct, the impression deep enough to show the curve of an arch, the ball of the foot. It could only have belonged to one person. Tom. I glanced back at the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. But he'd vanished. The hallway was empty, the shadows deep and still. There was no sign of him, no sound, no movement, just the faint, lingering scent of lake water hanging heavy in the air. "Tom?" I whispered, stepping back, my pulse racing. "Tom, are you—" A soft, ghostly whisper echoed through the room, cutting me off. "Ellie!" I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The voice was faint, distorted, like a breath of wind or a ripple in the water. It sent a shiver down my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Ellie!" The glow pulsed once, and then slowly faded, leaving the room dark and cold. I stood there, trembling, my mind reeling. He was trying to tell me something. I was sure of it now. But he was struggling as if the effort cost him something I couldn't see. He seemed lost and confused, his form flickering like a weak flame, unable to stay solid for long. "Tom," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself again. "What do you want?" But the room remained silent, the air thick and heavy. As I stared at the empty space where he'd stood, I realized that he needed help. Trouble was, I had no idea how to provide it. Part 6. The next few days were a blur. I kept expecting everything to go back to normal, to wake up and find out it had all been some terrible dream, but it never did. Tom was still gone, and the strange occurrences around the house only grew worse. Little things at first. Doors creaking open by themselves, the TV turning on in the middle of the night, the soft sound of water dripping in empty rooms. But it was the smell that got me the most. The unmistakable scent of lake water, cold and murky, clinging to the air like an invisible presence. Mum and Dad didn't seem to notice. They were still caught up in their own grief, moving through the house like shadows of themselves, barely speaking to each other or to me. But I noticed. Every time I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, every time I heard a faint whisper that sounded like my name, well, my heart would leap, and I'd find myself holding my breath, straining to catch some sign of him. "Tom, what are you trying to say?" But he never answered, never showed himself the way he had that night at the bottom of the stairs. It was as if he were fading, slipping further and further away, his presence growing weaker by the day. And yet he was still here. I knew it. I could feel it. And then one night, everything changed. I was laying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling when I heard it. The faint sound of splashing water echoing softly through the house. I shot up, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from downstairs. I crept to my door, my breath hitching, and peered out into the dark hallway. Nothing moved, but the sound continued, a soft rhythmic splash, 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 like someone wading through shallow water. "Tom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. No answer, just that steady, hypnotic splashing growing louder by the second. I stepped out into the hall, my pulse racing, and made my way toward the stairs. The house felt different tonight, colder, darker. The shadows seemed to shift and breathe, wrapping around me like a thick, suffocating fog. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, staring down into the murky darkness below. And then I saw it. A soft, pale glow flickering faintly at the bottom of the staircase. "Tom?" I whispered again, taking a step forward. The glow brightened slightly, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I took another step, then another, my legs trembling. The splashing grew louder, sharper, till it seemed to fill the entire house, echoing off the walls, the floors, the ceiling. My skin prickled with cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering violently. "Tom, is that you?" I called softly. And then, as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw him. He stood in the center of the living room, his small frame hunched and shivering, his clothes soaked and dripping. The glow surrounded him, pulsing softly, illuminating his pale, hollow face. Water pooled around his bare feet, spreading outward in dark, rippling circles. "Tom!" I gasped, stumbling forward. He didn't move, didn't react. He just stood there, staring blankly at the floor. "Tom, what's happening?" I whispered, my heart aching. "Why are you here?" His gaze lifted slowly, his eyes locking on mine. And for the first time, I saw it. The fear in his eyes, the way his shoulders trembled as if he was struggling to hold himself together. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice faint and broken. Well, my breath caught in my throat. "Tom, what do you want me to do? Just tell me. I'll do anything." But he just shook his head slowly, his gaze flickering to the far end of the room. I followed his gaze, my stomach twisting painfully. And then I saw her. A small figure, no more than 6 or 7, stood in the corner, half hidden in the shadows. Her hair was dark and tangled, her face pale and ghostly, and she looked wrong somehow, blurred like a reflection on the surface of the water. My pulse stuttered. Who is that?" Tom didn't answer. He just turned back to me, his expression twisted with pain and desperation. "She's going to drown," he whispered, his voice strained. "You have to help her." I stared at him, my heart pounding wildly. "What? Who is she? Where is she?" Tom's gaze shifted, and his eyes were dark and haunted. "The lake," he murmured, his voice barely more than a breath. "She's at the lake." My stomach dropped. "Tom, I don't..." "She's gonna drown, Ellie," he pleaded, his form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. "You have to save her, please." The glow around him flared suddenly, bright and blinding. I threw up a hand, shielding my eyes, my heart racing. When I lowered it again, he was gone. I staggered back, gasping for breath, my mind spinning. The room was empty, silent. No sign of Tom, no sign of the girl. Just the faint scent of lake water lingering in the air. "Tom!" I cried, spinning around. "Tom, come back, please. Just... But there was no answer, no movement. The house was dark and still, the only sound the rapid thudding of my own heartbeat. I sank to my knees, trembling. What had just happened? Who was that girl? What did he mean she was going to drown? How did he know? "Tom, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Just tell me what to do. I don't understand." But the room remained silent, empty, and deep down I knew he couldn't stay. Whatever was keeping him here, whatever fragile connection he had to this world, it was weakening. He was slipping further and further away, his presence growing fainter by the day. But there was something he needed me to do, someone I needed to help. "She's at the lake," I murmured, hugging my knees to my chest. "She's going to drown." I shivered, my breath hitching. Could it be real? Could there be someone, something waiting for me at Lake Newell? And if there was, could I really save her? I didn't know, but I had to try. For Tom's sake, for that little girl's sake, and for my own. Part 7. I felt like I was moving in a dream as I climbed out of bed, threw on my jacket and grabbed my bike. The house was silent, the shadows thick and heavy, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I stopped now, if I hesitated, I knew I'd lose my nerve. Tom's words echoed in my mind. "She's gonna drown. You have to save her." My hands shook as I wheeled my bike quietly down the driveway. The air was cold and still, the moon hanging low in the sky. I glanced back at the dark windows of my house one last time, then swung my leg over the seat and took off down the road. The ride to Lake Newell was a blur. The empty streets whizzed past, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows across the pavements. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath clouding in the chilly night air. I pedaled faster, the wind whipping through my hair. The dark shapes of the houses and trees seemed to merge into a single endless stretch of darkness. But I couldn't slow down, not now. As I neared the lake, the faint sound of water lapping against the shore reached my ears. I skidded to a stop, breathless and trembling, and leaned my bike against a tree. The park was deserted, the sand pale and empty under the moonlight. I shivered, hugging my jacket closer around me. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. "Tom," I called softly, my voice trembling. "Are you here?" No answer, just the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, the distant creak of a swinging sign by the lake entrance. But I could feel it, something drawing me forward, tugging at me like an invisible thread. I swallowed hard and started toward the shoreline, my shoes sinking into the soft sand. The water was smooth and dark, the moonlight casting eerie reflections across its surface. I took a deep breath, scanning the shoreline. The campground on the opposite bank was quiet, its flickering campfires just visible through the trees. I knew that campground, knew it was mostly families and kids on summer weekends like this one. Why would a little girl be out here alone at this hour? And then I saw her. She was at the far end of a narrow wooden dock, chasing fireflies. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. The girl was small, no more than 6 or 7, her hair wild and loose around her shoulders. She was wearing pale pink pajamas, the kind with long sleeves and a cartoon bunny printed on the front. Her tiny feet were bare, the moonlight glinting off her toes as she skipped and darted after the glowing insects. A small laugh escaped her lips as she caught one in her cupped hands, holding it close to her face, the bright light illuminating her wide, delighted eyes. What was she doing out here? It was the middle of the night. I took a step forward, squinting through the darkness. She must have gotten out of bed, I murmured to myself, my heart racing. Chasing fireflies. God, her parents probably don't even know she's gone. Panic surged through me. She was too far out, too close to the edge of the dock. One wrong step and she'd fall right into the deep water. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice high and desperate. "Hey, wait! Don't go any further!" But she didn't seem to hear me. She just laughed again, shaking the firefly free and watching it flit away. She took a step closer to the edge, reaching out with both hands, her gaze fixed on the glowing insects swirling around her. "Stop!" I screamed, breaking into a run. "Please, stop!" But it was too late. I watched, helpless, as she took one more step and slipped. Her small body hit the water with a soft splash, the sound carrying eerily through the stillness of the night. My breath caught in my throat. I skidded to a stop at the edge of the dock, staring down into the dark, rippling water. "No!" I gasped, dropping to my knees. "No, no, no!" The girl's pale face bobbed to the surface for a split second, her eyes wide and terrified, her mouth opening in a silent scream. And then she disappeared, pulled under by the icy grip of the lake. Oh, panic surged through me. Without thinking, I kicked off my shoes and dove in after her. Oh, the water was shockingly cold, closing around me like a vice. I gasped. The breath knocked from my lungs and kicked hard, forcing myself deeper. The murky water stung my eyes, blinding me. I reached out, my fingers groping desperately in the darkness, searching for any sign of her. "Come on, please, where are you?" Then I felt it. A small hand brushing against mine. Oh, I grabbed it, my heart leaping. The girl's hand was slippery and cold, her fingers limp in my grasp. I kicked hard, pulling her close, my lungs burning with the effort. Well, she was heavier than I'd expected, her small body weighed down by the waterlogged pajamas. But I couldn't let go. I wouldn't. I kicked again, harder this time, and felt us break the surface. I gasped, sucking in a mouthful of cold air, and tightened my grip on the girl. She was coughing weakly, her eyes wide and frightened. I wrapped my arm around her, keeping her head above water, and started kicking toward the shore. "It's okay," I panted, my voice hoarse. "I've got you, just hold on." The swim back was only 50 or 60 feet, but it felt like an eternity. The water tugged at me, pulling me down, and the cold was sapping my strength. I struggled to keep moving, my muscles screaming in protest. I could barely see the shoreline, the dark outline of the trees blurring in and out of focus. But I kept going, my pulse pounding, my lungs burning. Finally, I felt the soft sand beneath my feet. I staggered forward, dragging the girl onto the shore. We collapsed in a heap, gasping and shivering, our clothes soaked and heavy. I cradled her small form, my chest heaving, and looked down at her pale, tear-streaked face. "You're okay," I whispered, brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "You're safe now." She blinked up at me, her eyes wide and bewildered. She was shaking, her tiny body trembling violently. I pulled her closer, trying to warm her, my own body shivering uncontrollably. "Where's your family?" I asked softly, glancing back across the lake. "Are they at the campground?" The girl nodded weakly, her gaze drifting back to the dark water. I was chasing the fireflies," she whispered, her voice small and broken. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to catch one." Tears pricked at my eyes, and I hugged her tighter. "It's okay," I murmured. "You're okay." "Aubrey, where are you?" A man's voice, desperate and panicked, echoed from across the campground. "Aubrey!" A woman's voice joined his, her tone shrill and trembling. "Please, answer us." My head snapped up. "Over here," I shouted, my voice hoarse and ragged. "She's over here." The voices stopped, and I heard them calling back, closer now, their footsteps pounding against the sand. I turned to the girl, Aubrey, and gave her a weak smile. "It's gonna be okay," I whispered. "Your mom and dad are coming." A moment later, a man and woman burst out of the darkness, stumbling to a stop as they spotted us. "Oh my God!" the woman gasped, dropping to her knees beside Aubrey. "Aubrey, baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Aubrey shook her head, her face crumpling. "I'm okay," she whispered, clinging to her mother's arm. "I'm okay, Mommy." The man turned to me, his face pale and stricken. Did you save her?" I nodded weakly, my whole body trembling. She fell in. I just pulled her out." His face twisted with emotion, and he reached out, gripping my arm. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. "Thank you so much." I opened my mouth to respond, but the world swayed around me. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the sand, my limbs numb and heavy. I heard the parents' frantic voices, felt their hands on my shoulders, but I couldn't focus. Everything was spinning, blurring. And then, through the haze, I saw him. Tom stood at the water's edge, his form faint and wavering, watching us with that same calm, distant gaze. "Thank you," he whispered softly. I blinked, tears blurring my vision. Tom, But he was already fading, his form dissolving into the mist, melting away like smoke. "Tom," I tried to call out, but my voice was too weak. "No, wait, please." But he was gone. And this time, I knew he wasn't coming back. Part 8. The house was dark and quiet when I finally got home. My parents had already gone to bed. I slipped in through the front door, still shivering from the chill of the lake water, my limbs sore and heavy with exhaustion. The events of the night blurred together in my mind. The frantic ride to the lake, the panic when I saw the little girl fall in, the icy water closing around me as I fought to pull her back to shore. And Tom standing at the water's edge, his ghostly form watching me with those calm, solemn eyes. I hung my jacket on the back of a chair, the fabric still damp and smelling faintly of lake water, and wandered into the living room. The house felt strange tonight, quiet but not empty. The lingering weight I'd carried for weeks seemed lighter, as if something inside me had finally loosened, freeing me from its grip. But it wasn't just me. The entire house felt different. Warmer, lighter. Tom was really gone. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I'd saved the little girl. I'd done what he'd wanted, but, well, done what he'd needed me to do. And now, finally, he was at peace. But it hurt. It hurt so much more than I'd expected. A soft, almost imperceptible breeze brushed past me, stirring the curtains. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. There on the wall opposite the couch, a framed photograph of Tom, taken last summer at his birthday party, seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. He was grinning, his eyes bright with laughter, his hair sticking up in wild tufts as he held up a slice of cake. I smiled weakly, tears pricking at my eyes. Goodbye, Tom. I glanced at the empty hallway, half expecting to see his shadowy form flickering in the dark. But the hallway was empty, and the house was still. He really, truly was gone this time. I leaned back, closing my eyes, my body sinking into the soft cushions. It felt strange, wrong almost, to be relieved, but I was. I was relieved and sad and happy and devastated all at once. Tom had needed me. He hadn't been angry, he hadn't blamed me. He just wanted to protect someone else from suffering the way he had. He just wanted to save her. And I had. Well, the thought warmed me, a tiny spark of light in the darkness. I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling it spread through me, filling the empty spaces that grief had hollowed out. Goodbye, Tom, I whispered softly. I'll never forget you. I stood up slowly, my muscles aching, and made my way to the window. The night outside was calm, the moon casting a soft, silvery glow over the lawn. I stared out at the quiet street, the shadows of the trees swaying gently in the breeze. And for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Tom was gone, he was free, and so was I. I reached up, touching the glass with my fingertips, my heart aching with bitter-sweet sorrow. I love you, I murmured. I hope you're happy now. I hope you found what you were looking for. I turned away, the tears slipping down my cheeks, and headed upstairs. My body felt heavy, my eyes burning with exhaustion. But the weight on my chest, the suffocating, crushing guilt that kept me awake night after night, it was gone. Tom had forgiven me. I knew that now. As I reached my bedroom, I hesitated, glancing back at the hallway. The moonlight cast soft, silvery shadows across the floor, and the air was cool and still. I took a deep breath, my heart aching, and smiled. Goodbye, I whispered one last time. And then I turned out the light, crawled into bed and, for the first time since the accident, slept soundly through the night. Well, it is kind of nice when there's a happy ending, isn't there? Not such a happy beginning and, well, poor old Tommy. But anyway, something good came from him in the end. I do like a good ghost story like that one. I haven't read one like that in quite a long time. Thank you to Craig Grishek from Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, the author of that story and the mastermind behind that channel. So please do me a favor, look at the links in the video description. Head over there if you're not familiar with the channel. Loads of good stuff going on. And he's having a little bit of a tricky time at the moment, so go over there, leave some nice comments, and, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's enough for this Monday evening. I'll be back again on Wednesday. Maybe a podcast tomorrow night over on my second channel. If you're not familiar with that, please check it out. Well, till the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams. Till the next time. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The Face of Fear by Michael Whitehouse. Twice I saw the face in the window, pressed up against the surface, its icy breath fogging the cold glass. At first it appeared strange to me, the skin beneath its eyes drooping in ripples of flesh, exposing the sensitive strata underneath. It was the winter of '83, and I'd booked the cabin for 3 nights. Only 3. A break was needed, somewhere to relax, somewhere to recover. I'd had a heart attack 2 months earlier, a painful, excruciating experience which I would not wish on my worst enemy. Lying there sprawled across my kitchen floor, the sharp agony had siphoned through my veins, chest, arm, jaw. I lost consciousness only to find myself in a hospital bed days later. It was my daughter, Jen, who discovered me. Oh, thank God for her. The cabin was a retreat, a place far removed from the stresses of my life. The fallout from a failed marriage, the pressures of a flagging career, and the ordeal of staring death in the face. Comfort had become a stranger. Fear, however, was now both my enemy and constant companion. Each beat of my heart was felt, the slightest change of rhythm or palpitation a nursery for terror. The knowledge that, at any time, the agony of death could be brought upon me by the very thing which gave life, seemed perverted, an abomination of purpose. And I wandered through life like glass, afraid that the slightest exertion might shatter me. The doctors had done their part through surgery and medication. Now it was my turn to help my body heal as best it could. Only time would tell how successful such efforts had been. I was advised to relax, to undertake some limited physical therapy, and to avoid any anxiety or sudden shocks. But how does one avoid a shock or a nasty surprise? By its very definition, a shock is an unknown, unforeseen, unexpected event which lurks in the darkness of obscurity, out there, mingled with a fog of yet to come, around a corner, in the next room, a wrong turn taken, or an unwelcome phone call bearing bad news. I found the entire concept of avoiding the unanticipated to be a laughable one. And still, there I was, preparing for the quiet solitude of the countryside, following the advice of the experts and those men and women in sterile white coats. I almost ignored their recommendations, remaining slumped at home, festering, counting the hours and beats of my heart as finite measures of my life. When still, the mind can unleash a terrible onslaught of memories. I thought of Susie, of the years spent together and now wasted. We'd been happy once, but I played my part in where we ended. She came to visit me in the hospital. Perhaps she too wished for reconciliation, but feeling the gulf between us as she sat at my bedside was worse than any physical heartache. We smiled and spoke the empty words of day to day, which litter each and every hospital ward. As she left, she touched my hand for the briefest of moments, yet I could tell that she no longer sheltered the spark she once had for me. She tried to be kind, but some things done and said can never be taken back, a fire of resentment which can never be extinguished. They say time heals all wounds, but some cuts are deeper than others. In those bleak days of loneliness, I'd only the thought of my daughter to keep me from slipping into a dark depression, yet she stayed with her mother most of the time. Perhaps I'd been cold towards her too. I knew my failings as a husband, but I never conceived that I'd been anything but a loving father, and so I lived for those brief 2 days a week when I could see her. The in-between times were filled with fear of death and thoughts of worthlessness. Friends, family, doctors, they all urged me to go on a holiday. But I was afraid, scared of my heart giving up, frightened by the possibilities brought forth by an anxious mind preoccupied with a fragile body which housed it. If it hadn't been for Jay, I would never have gone. He visited me several times a week and encouraged me to be as upbeat as possible with his usual quips and jokes. He kept me going, in fact, and finally persuaded me that a few days away in the countryside would do me good. Still, I was terrified of being left alone, isolated, away from things and people. What if I had another attack? Perhaps the next one would be fatal. And even if I could be saved, I would be too far for help to reach me in time. I needed somewhere that I could relax away from the world, and yet not so far from the wonders of modern medicine. That's why we chose Blackwood Cabin. Jay had visited there as a child. It sat on the outskirts of a large forest, hemmed in on a patch of open ground by a beautiful flowing river on the other side. Despite its seeming detachment from the world, it was in fact only 6 miles from the nearest hospital, which stood near a small town on the boundary of that thick, darkened web of trees. This, and the insistence of Jay that he stay as well, left me contented enough in the knowledge that help would always be at hand. I could feel myself begin to relax as we left the city, and during the drive we both talked and laughed, reminiscing about our days together at university. For the first time in months, I felt positive about the world, watching the motorway recede into the distance, relinquishing its concrete grip to the wild, untamed and imposing grandeur of the great outdoors. Only once did I bring up the mention of Susie and our separation, but Jay quickly turned the conversation around to something more positive and fun, as he often did. I held out hope that the divorce would never be finalized, that she'd come back to me. But hope, too, can be an exhausting predicament, so I attempted to filter Susie from my mind as best I could. The single-track road weaved its way through Blackwood Forest. We wriggled over 6 miles of twists and turns and serpentine slitherings before we finally reached the clearing. A large waterlogged patch of wild grass carpeted the area, so much so that we had to park the car a few hundred feet from our destination for fear of getting stuck. In the center of the soaked, near marshland ground stood the rickety and aging shelter which we intended to call home for the following 3 days. The cabin was itself small, with one main room complete with cozy log burner and stove, and 2 cramped bedrooms at the back. It had been there for an age, that much was certain, and the darkened timber beams which carried the heavy burden of time above sagged and dipped as they lurched across the ceiling. The smell of moss and bark swathed the air, and the sound of the flowing river on the other side of the cabin bubbled and brewed, peaceful, serene and yet mysterious. The first day was uneventful, exactly what I needed, relaxing with a book in front of 3 large logs smouldering in the fire, and spending a little while sitting on the steps to the cabin, watching the river swell and swarm with the winter currents. It was then that I understood the naming of the place. Peering out across the bubbled grass to the tree line, the forest seemed picturesque yet impenetrable from distance, and the clearing where the cabin sat provided only a temporary pause to its encroachment, before it once again continued to blanket the land on the other side of the river. The woodland was dark and black, yes, but full of life, of vibrancy, of things, deer, foxes, beetles, rabbits. But I never would have guessed at the horrors which lurked between its tightly woven evergreen branches. Many tourist traps survive on tales of ghosts and ghouls hidden somewhere nearby. Stories exaggerated by pub landlords or hotel managers, speaking of rooms where something ominous walks at the midnight hour. Visitors flock to such places, hoping to spend the night in a haunted room, to glimpse something in the darkness which whispers the thought that life is more bizarre, more interesting than we could possibly imagine. Even that lonely and forgotten cabin seemed to have something of a myth attached to it. In a bookshelf, tucked away in the corner of one of the bedrooms, Jay found a warped old hardback. The papers were yellowed, and while it contained the publication date of 1967, I was certain that it had only ever seen one pressing, left in the cabin to titillate those staying there. The book was called The Beast of Blackwood Forest. Rifling through it, I found that the author had dedicated much of her life to the documentation of a local legend. I had myself heard the stories when I was younger, as I'd once dated a girl who lived in a nearby town. All the kids talked about the Beast of Blackwood, a creature which everyone's uncle had seen while out hunting in the forest. Dark, hulking, monstrous. Of course, I always laughed at such things, and no concrete evidence for it had ever been found. But each winter, there were rumors, whispers about something shambling through the woods at night. As the day gave way to twilight, I read through some of those pages while Jay stocked the stove and prepared supper. Although I discarded the legend as nonsense, I found the book quite compelling, and the eyewitness testimonies contained therein affected me enough to cause me to see something which wasn't there. Shadows moving outside under the cloak of dusk. I began to feel my heart once more, and decided that it was best to leave the terrors of the horror genre, fact and fiction, behind. My mind was still fraught with the strain of Susie leaving me, and the fear of the slightest palpitation signaling another heart attack, so accounts of a terrifying creature preying on those in my immediate vicinity, no matter how preposterous, were not suitable for a fragile disposition. The clean country air, on the other hand, was doing me the world of good. After dinner, Jay surprised me with a bottle of my favorite whiskey, 16-year Lagavulin. I knew that the doctors would frown upon it, but the idea of swishing that warming liquid gold around my mouth and taking a deep gulp reminded me of something essential. It reminded me of being normal again, of being strong, of sitting in my family home with my wife and daughter, enjoying the finer side of life. Yeah, a few drams would not be unwelcome. We talked and laughed about the past while playing cards and enjoying, again, reliving old adventures we'd had traveling together during our university summers with the old gang. I would have happily stayed there, wrapped in the comfort of those memories for an eternity, and in many ways I wish I could have sunk further into that moment of relief from my recent worries. But that was not to be. Around 11 o'clock, the log burner was running low, and we'd all but run out of wood. Jay drunkenly picked up a torch and decided that he would go and quickly gather some more, so that we could keep the good times flowing. I didn't protest. I was happy. I was content to allow that night to continue. He was a good friend, and insisted that I not raise a finger out there in the cold darkness. He was always braver than me, and I'd be lying if I said that the outlandish thought of something lurking in the woods hadn't left its mark. I watched from the window for a moment as the beam from his torch bounced along the uneven, now frozen grass. The light dropped to the ground for a second, and I heard the drunken merry laughter of my friend echoing out as he picked himself back up before continuing towards the tree line. Smiling, I returned to my book of choice, flicking through a few pages of an Ellery Queen detective novel, less dangerous than the previous read. After about 15 minutes, I realized how truly silent the cabin was. No noise, no wind, no sounds of life or the living, and for the first time I sensed something sinister resting in the stillness. Suddenly Jay burst into the cabin and collapsed on the floor, panting. He turned to the door and kicked it shut with his heels frantically, his eyes wide, panicked, disbelieving. Scrambling back to his feet, he turned a small table on its end and wedged it against the skin of the aging wood under the handle. "Help me, for Christ's sake," he whispered anxiously. I stood up quickly and rushed to my friend's aid, helping him pack furniture, anything with weight, against the door. It was the first time since the heart attack that I'd physically exerted myself, and it wouldn't be the last. I felt the blood pump through my chest and momentarily quivered at the sensation. I tried to find out what had happened, but Jay was exhausted and distraught. A shiny streak of sweat ran down his cheek as he wheezed and gasped for air. He flicked the light switch, smothering us in a darkness which was only broken by a crescent moon hanging in the sky outside, its slivered light vaguely illuminating the inside of the cabin. Prowling the window which gazed out towards the forest, his stare never broke for a moment from the frozen world outside. We stood there, my repeated questions going unanswered. Slowly my fragility returned. I rubbed my chest for a moment as my friend's anxiety seemed to spread to me. My heart raced, and my mind swung like a pendulum between the fear of an agonizing heart attack and the terror etched on Jay's face. Just what had scared him so badly? I breathed deeply to calm myself, but Jay took no notice. He was too fixated on the darkness outside. It was only when I poured him a large whiskey that he finally broke his silence. I've never been frightened of words, but my friend certainly shook me. There's something out there. I didn't reply immediately, but when I did, I could only think to ask, something? What could he have meant by such an indefinite term? There were no bears in that part of the country, no large predators at all. But it did seem, indeed, that Jay had seen something big in the woods. He'd been gathering wood for the stove around the tree line of the forest, and as he described standing there listening to a short flurry of rain tap the canopy above him, I could see the fear grip his insides, as it did mine. My heart began to pound harder as Jay stuttered over the words. I saw it moving between the trees, straight for me. I didn't look back, but I'm telling you, it wasn't human. Part 2. I knew my friend was convinced by what he said, but while I dismissed the notion of an unknown creature stalking the woods outside, and perhaps in the attempt hid the descriptions from the yellow pages of that book which had etched into my mind, I very much did entertain the idea that there was someone out there. Someone dangerous, mad, or perhaps both. My pulse continued to race, and I could feel my heart beating wildly at the thought of a shadowy figure prowling around outside, watching us, waiting. After finally composing myself, Jay asked if I was okay, his fear now turning to concern for his friend. But I myself was transfixed on one course of action: escape. I rushed over to the cabin's phone, but on picking up the receiver, I was greeted by an icy silence. The line was dead, and what that still, lifeless receiver said about the unseen threat I was sure we now faced was enough to thrust dread into my very soul. I stood there for a moment, desperately trying to formulate a course of action. That serene, peaceful place in the daytime now felt imposing and absent of mercy. I just wanted to go home. Jay motioned for me and then pointed with a shaking hand at the darkness outside. It was then that he let out a suffocated whisper. "It's there." Looking out into the moonlit night, I saw nothing at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkened landscape outside, I finally saw it. Deep down, I'd hoped that Jay had simply drunk too much and spooked himself while out there, but now any dream of a simple and harmless explanation was extinguished. Someone was standing among the trees, just standing and looking, bathed in darkness. It was difficult to make out any detail. All I could see was an outline, the outline of a stooped and hunched figure, its arm wrapped around a tree as if steadying itself. I couldn't be sure, but it felt as though its stare was firmly transfixed on our cabin, our rickety shelter for the night which had no doubt seen many winters there before, and perhaps even encountered whoever or whatever was looking at us from across the sodden stretch of icy march which surrounded us. Who is that? I stammered. Keep your voice down, Jay snapped in return. And so we whispered and spoke of the hunched figure standing only a few hundred feet from us. It's not a man, Jay kept saying, but I continued in my attempts to dissuade him from that conclusion. I saw it through the trees. It moved. It moved in a weird way, limping, like it was off balance or deformed or something. But it moved fast. I'll have no idea how I made it back. Maybe it won't leave the trees. His eyes widened, and it was clear that a revelation had sprung forth from his mind. He turned suddenly, walking across the room to a table where I had left those yellowed pages, which spoke of a strange creature living in the woods. Jay thumbed through it, shielding the light from his torch as best he could with his hand. As I watched him scan through the contents and flick to what he seemed so animated about, I almost laughed at the insinuation. It's a man, Jay. Just someone messing with us. But he was convinced otherwise. Look at this, he said, following the text with his finger as he read. Accounts have varied over the centuries, but the central element to the myth states that the beast of Blackwood only wanders from the forest late at night. It's been suggested that the creature uses a thick canopy as protection during daylight hours. Locals claim that he's entirely nocturnal. But there's no such thing as the beast. I could feel my pulse thicken as my blood pressure increased at the idea, so much so that I had to sit for a moment to allow my heart to recover its normal beat. Hey, are you okay? Yeah, I'll be fine. Let's just wait until it gets light and we can leave. Are you crazy? You didn't see that thing up close. Oh, it's huge and quick. If it wants to get in here, it will. So there's a weirdo in the woods. He can't wait us out all night. Anyway, he's probably just a hunter or someone camping in the forest. He'll be harmless. Well, I listened to the words exit my mouth, and even I didn't believe them. There was something about the place, a silence, deathly, icy, a sickly sense of dread hanging in the air, hidden between the bark and the moss. Jay turned to look outside to the grassland which edged towards our car, sleeping in the night chill between us and the brooding forest. We have to leave. Or you can stay here and I'll get the police. Either way, I'm going. He turned to look at me sternly. Which would you prefer? I might not have been convinced that it had been an unknown creature that had stalked him through the woods, but by God, I didn't want to stay in that cabin alone. I threw my stuff in a bag, as Jay did the same, each of us grabbing a knife from the kitchen for protection. And there we stood, looking at the door, a pile of furniture wedged behind it. We dismantled our makeshift barricade as quietly as we could and then, brandishing our kitchen knives nervously, slowly opened the door. It creaked softly, sucking in the night air which felt cold and bitter, and revealed a slow patter of light rain threatening something greater from the heavens. Jay poked his head out first, and then, after a brief silence, waved me on. We descended the dozen or so steps which led down onto the grass, and as we peered around the corner, we could see our ticket home. The car was parked a few hundred feet from where we stood, nestled in the same piece of dirt track, which would give way to road and then the safe embrace of home, if we made it. It would take a minute or so to reach, but with knowledge of the figure in the forest lurking around somewhere nearby, it seemed like an eternity away. I slung the strap of my bag over my shoulder, and Jay, mindful of my condition, headed towards the car first. You keep looking around, he urged me with a whisper. The waterlogged grass squelched underfoot, and the rain began to grow more angered as we stepped tentatively towards the safety of the car. We tried to be as quiet as possible, but even in the moonlight we had to use our torches to see what was ahead of us, advertising our position to anyone or anything in the vicinity. I kept looking out towards the forest, the tree line, the thickening river behind me. I could see nothing, nor could I hear anything but the raindrops which now battered against the car and splattered on my hood. And then, Jay suddenly stopped. "What is it?" I whispered over the rain, my heart now beating wildly, throat dried by worry. The rain subsided slightly, replaced by the silence of a landscape petrified, frozen by a winter chill. Jay spoke without turning his head towards me, his breath visible in the beam of my torch. "Thought I saw something moving in the tree line." The crack of wood, the sound of the unseen walking over the forest floor. "Come on," Jay whispered with urgency, and we broke into a brisk jog. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as my pulse thumped desperately. As we continued on, all I could think of was my heart and the deep, stuttered and freezing breaths I took in trying to calm myself. As we drew closer to the car, the faintest wisp of moonlight hung in the air as the crescent above us swung behind a pack of clouds, and the world took on a strange, icy blue. Stumbling over the grass, we finally reached the grey outline of our ride home. "Open the door. Let's get out of here," I pleaded as Jay fumbled for his keys, dropping them to the ground. "Oh, bastard," he growled. Instinctively, I pointed my torch downward, illuminating the long, wild grass, now whitened by a thick coat of frost beneath our feet. I waited for an instant, and as I peered down at the ground, I recognized that something was very wrong. Jay was not moving. He hadn't even looked down to see where he'd dropped the keys. He was staring at something, and the look of sheer panic in his eyes told me that we were not alone. I raised my hand, and with it a beam of light glinted off of the car. Two large eyes stared back from the other side of the vehicle, a hunched, hulking thing, glaring up at us, crouched behind the car bonnet. It shivered, and then again, and as it rose up, I saw it for a moment. Wet, drenched hair, mouth gaping, its face a pallid and quivering grey. It groaned loud, with a strange, unearthly and high-pitched undertone, which only added to the creature's horrid appearance. "Run!" Jay yelled. Well, I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped my bag and ran as fast as I could. I panted, sweated, stumbled, thrust myself forward with every ounce of energy I had left in me, and as I did so, the first pains came. The freezing cold stung my eyes. I fell twice, helped to my feet by my friend. My heart staggered, it heaved and battered in my chest. I could feel the slight twinge of pain run up my neck, nestle in my jaw. My chest tightened, and I cried in terror. This was a heart attack. I yelled out, "Help!" But all I could hear was Jay running behind me, screaming for me to move faster. "Keep going, and don't look back." As the cabin came into touching distance, I heard the heartbreaking absence of my friend's footsteps. I knew Jay. All those years, as close as we were, well, he was always the brave one. Something I had at times been jealous of. The stubborn one, enough to stand up to anything. I understood implicitly that he was buying me time, a selfless gesture which helped me make it to the steps, scrambling up them only to turn and see him staring the creature down, face to face, the beast shrouded in shards of night. As its hulking mass lunged towards him, a searing pain ran up my neck from my chest. I collapsed to the ground, but he needed me, and whatever life was left in my failing body, I was compelled to use to help him. Staggering to my feet, the night air stinging my lungs, I lurched forward, clutching my chest, ready to strike the beast with everything I had left. Before I could assist, Jay appeared from the darkness, grabbed my arm, and threw me into the cabin. He frantically barricaded the door once more. We slumped to the floor, breathless, deciding to keep the lights out and listen. Shuffling in the darkness, but nothing more. pain in my chest had subsided slightly. It was clear that the heart attack had begun, but when it would take me seemed uncertain. What was that thing? I asked between gasps. I don't know, but it wasn't human, said Jay solemnly, before showing me the knife he'd used during the fight, now covered in a putrid black liquid. I don't think this even hurt it this much. This is crazy. What do we do now? I don't know. I just don't know. And we waited and waited, but the pain in my chest grew steadily, my breath more erratic. I took my pills, but I knew that the old enemy had returned and that I needed more than something to calm my nerves. If I didn't receive medical attention, there was every chance I would die. Part 3. Jay stared at me as I sat on the old couch against the window, worried that each breath would be my last. We need to get you to a hospital, he said gently. Yeah, just chopper me in. We both laughed for a moment. Jay stood up and looked outside. He seemed reluctant at first, and no wonder considering what lurked outside, but his concern for me appeared to slowly drown out his fear. I can't see anything out there anymore. The moon's behind those clouds, and we might not get another chance. I think I can make it to the car quicker on my own. Yeah, but that thing out there, I said, deep down ashamed that my fear of death galvanized a hope that my friend would indeed find the courage to try again. He leaned over me and smiled kindly, patting me on the shoulder. I can do this. It's pitch black out there. You need to use a torch, and then it would see you, I said, wincing more at the growing pain in my chest. I'll flash it on and off. That way it won't know where I am. Maybe it'll get confused. I don't know. He clenched the torch tightly while looking at the kitchen knife in his other hand. Hopefully that'll give me enough time to see what's in front of me and head for the car. The key should still be where I dropped them. Jay, please wait until morning, I asked. But as my friend looked at me clutching my chest, I knew he'd already made up his mind, and part of me was glad for the hope his bravery provided. Right, barricade the door as soon as I'm out. Okay, I said, trying to hold back tears both of pain and worry for my friend's life. He gave me a hug, and then he was gone. I closed the door and bolstered it once more with anything I could find, before pulling myself back up onto the couch and looking outside. At first, I could see nothing but the black stillness of the forest. Then a blast of light, then another and another as Jay's torch sporadically burst into life. Each flash illuminated the landscape around him like a ghostly photograph documenting his progress towards the car. I could see what he was doing, and I smiled to myself for a moment, once more impressed by his ingenuity. He wasn't moving in a straight line, but zigzagging so that his path could not be anticipated. Another flash, and another. Each time no sign of the creature and one more precious movement closer to the car. Grass, tree, an anonymous wilderness of darkness. Another flash, another patch of grass. Oh, he was so close. Then the intermittent light became erratic, moving one way then another, backwards, left, right. Was he lost? Was he unsure which direction the car was in? A more horrific thought then entered my mind. Was he being chased? A flash of light, nothing. Then another, nothing again. Finally the light beamed. He'd made it to the car. The light was quickly extinguished, followed by the sound of a door opening. One last flash of the torch, the isolated outline of a hunched figure standing behind my friend. A blood-curdling scream, then nothing. Jay was gone. The beast had got him, and I was alone. Grief now mingled with fear, feeding the pains in my chest and arm. My friend was most probably dead, and I was certain that I'd soon follow him. I fell to my knees, sure that this was it, the end. Agony ran up my chest once more. There I knelt in the darkness, alone, resigned to my death. But as my heart slowed, my thoughts became clear. I turned to my daughter. Whether a good dad or not, I would be damned if I was going to leave her fatherless. What of Susie? Well, I still loved her, and perhaps in those sweet memories of better times between us, I could fix things, bring us back together as a family. She could learn to love me again. Yeah, I would set things right. My heart still beat, and as long as it did, there was time left yet. For hope, for escape, for life. But time to do what? The phone was dead, and all I could wait for was daylight. Yet that was at least 3 hours away, and I severely doubted that I would last that long. Never mind that I was unsure that the old cabin door could survive an attack from whatever that hulking creature was which lurked outside. I peered out through the window, the rain lashing down once more, obscuring an already ill-defined exterior world. And still, I was certain I could see something limping around in the darkness. As glints of moonlight pierced through the charcoal clouds above, I was sure that the attacker was out there somewhere, pacing, circling, waiting. But what was it? Was it a man? Or a thing yet to be discovered by science? I did not know where to turn, but all I could think of was getting home to my family. The hopeful warm embrace of Susie and my daughter was enough to fuel my search for a way out. My only refuge was the book, that volume which I'd mocked so readily before. I had to now consider the possibility that my dear friend and I had both come into contact with the beast of Blackwood. At the start of the day, that idea would have seemed ridiculous, but fear opens the mind quickly to any avenue of escape. I sat at the table and used the light from my torch to illuminate the pages, still shielding it from the outside. What I read intrigued me. The creature had been described since the 1700s. There was even the suggestion that it had been seen before that, as there were references to the Grey Man of Blackwood Forest in fragmented accounts from centuries earlier. There didn't seem to be much in the way of 20th century sightings. In fact, the last person to come forward officially had been in 1952, claiming to have encountered a stooped, grey-faced figure with a contorted arched back, disappearing between the trees on the other side of the forest. The original myths did not say much about its origins, but it certainly spoke of its motivations. The creature was drawn or attracted by greed. Children would be told to share and be kind, otherwise the beast of Blackwood would appear from the forest and snatch them right away at night. I couldn't look in the mirror and say that I was never guilty of greed or selfishness, or of a number of other petty human frailties, but to be punished in this way seemed cruel. A dying prisoner trapped in the cabin of Blackwood Forest. Returning to the book, the only supposed protection against the creature was light, or being a person without selfish frailty. In centuries gone by, villagers in the local area would line the paths through the forest with burning torches when the beast had been sighted, to ward it away from unwary travelers. Each thump sent waves of terror through my body. It wasn't my heart, but someone at the door. I hoped beyond hope that my friend had once again managed to evade the creature's grasp. Brandishing a kitchen knife, I hobbled to the door and plucked up the courage to shout, "Jay, is that you?" I prayed that it was, but the answer I was given was not the voice of one of my oldest friends, nor was it even that of a man, but the shrill cry of something utterly inhuman. A sound which spoke of time and age, and of moss and dank forest. A childlike shriek of unspeakable purpose. The door shook violently as I piled more chairs, pots, anything I could find, behind the wooden barrier. The pounding was loud and angered, and the cries continued. I clutched my ears in despair. Then I remembered. The light. The torches of old warding the beast away. I flicked the switch and the porch light came on outside. Another cry echoed out across the empty landscape, and at that, the thudding stopped. I quickly turned all the lights on in the house, now realizing the creature's weakness. I wasn't sure if I would last, but if I could just make it all the way till dawn, maybe the sun would save me. Then I heard it, the sound of something moving, shuffling, climbing. I stood paralyzed at the realization. It came from my bedroom. The beast had gotten in, attracted no doubt by any greed and selfishness I'd harbored throughout my life. Slowly the door from the bedroom creaked open. My heart pounded, and again my thoughts turned to my family, to my daughter's laugh and the comforting caress of my wife. They fueled me, drove me to a strength I did not know I had. I launched in terror across the room, battering against the door. Even with all of my momentum, the creature's hand managed to slip through the gap, its bobbled grey skin and black matted hair soaked by the rain. I swung with the knife, only to miss its arm. The beast seemed to hesitate for a moment, and as it did, I shoved my hand through the gap in the door and flicked on the light in the room. A howl of pain, and then nothing. I gasped for air and rested against the door for a time, before I finally plucked up the courage to look inside. A window lay wide open, but the room was empty. I closed the window and staggered back into the main room. My heart raced, and while I fought to stay on my feet, a sweeping pain arched up through my back and needled into my chest, knocking the wind out of me. I felt like I was going to pass out, and stumbled forward, landing on the couch. I breathed slow and deep. Oh, not yet, please God, not yet. The cabin remained eerily quiet, and in that silence sat the memories of better times, of my daughter playing as a child, of traveling with Jay in our 20s, of Susie's smile. I don't know how long I lay there, but I knew that soon my body would give up. I looked out through the large bay window behind the couch and hoped to see the first welcome rays of sunlight, but I saw nothing but darkness. If I was to survive, I had to make it to that car, outrun the beast and drive through the forest to a hospital, or at least a main road. If I was to see my family again, to put everything right, the car was my only hope. It was all or nothing. Then suddenly the creature's stilted head rose up from beneath the windowsill. The inhuman face pressed against the cold glass. Its grey skin sagged and weeped away from its eyes, the moist red flesh underneath visible in the cabin's light. Oh, the shock had finished me. My heart stopped for a brief moment, and then thudded, struggling to maintain my life. My body went limp, my head resting only inches from the window. Looking up helplessly, I watched as the beast stared into my eyes through the pane of glass. My heart sprang into another deluge of beats, battering away at the inside of my chest. A sharp pain ran up my neck. The creature's green-tinged stare stabbed through me, and as its breath fogged the glass, I grabbed the only thing at hand, the old yellowed book, and thrust it at that putrid face. Book, followed by fist, shattered the glass. Countless pieces and shards showered down upon both beast and myself. A scream, a hideous shriek of derision cut through the icy blackened night as I struck those horrid, accursed features again and again. Its thorned hands waved and flailed, grabbing hold of me. For a second I thought it was going to tear me from the inside of the cabin. Then the winter frost came to my defense. The beast slipped from its footing on a pipe which clung to the outside of the rickety old shack, and as I clawed at its face with utter disgust, the creature fell the 6 or 7 feet to the ground below. The sound of something hurt lying beneath the shattered window broke my daze as I stared at the contents of my hands. Where there once had been eyes, the face now stared eyeless at me. Where there once had been a mouth, the creature gaped wide, lifeless, jawless, and utterly without agency. For in my fading grip lay the torn and crumpled remains of a mask. On the ground below, a man writhed in pain. wrapped in the vestiges of a hulking, false, monstrous suit, the fall having knocked the wind out of him. Something then moved in the darkness nearby, a patter of feet, light and agile. Susie, my soon-to-be ex-wife, the one I'd adored and agonized over. Well, she screamed, attending to her lover on the ground, my closest and dearest friend Jay, the beast of Blackwood Forest. Susie looked up at me with hatred and contempt in her eyes, but I couldn't muster anger nor jealousy. All I could think of was that I must have been a monster to have deserved such malice from those I loved, the two people I trusted most in the world. Jay slowly rose to his feet, yet he could not acknowledge me. He could not look up to the friend he'd betrayed. Then it came. Finally, my heart began to give in. Not at fright or fear, but at sadness, loss, the anguish of a broken heart. I stood up clutching my chest, and as I staggered backwards, I saw the smiling face of Susie, and then the words of my once trusted friend. Oh, thank God. They embraced beneath the window as I fell to the cold and solid wooden cabin floor, and yet I did not lose consciousness. The pain was agonizing, but nothing compared to the sharp incisions made by each word spoken from below the window. "What are we going to do about the window?" Susie asked. "I'll just say that he smashed it during the heart attack." "But maybe they'll guess." "No, baby, they won't guess anything. He'll be dead and we can start a new life together when the insurance pays out. Now you need to go back to the woods and go home. I'll clean up here and then phone an ambulance once I'm sure he's gone." I almost chuckled to myself as I writhed around helpless on the floor. I'd hoped that Susie had refused a divorce because of love, because deep down she still wanted me. But instead, it was only to hang on to how much money my death would make for her. For a while, I heard Jay slip and swear as he attempted to climb up the wooden window once more. But each time he failed to pull himself inside. He then changed tactic and tried to push at the door, but again, I'd barricaded it effectively, and obviously he didn't want to force it and leave further evidence of foul play. And it was then that he started shouting in anger, even cursing my name of all things. It was only a matter of time before he got in, cleaned the place up, and told the police how sorry he was that his dear old friend's heart just gave up. My last thoughts were of my daughter, never having the chance to fix my mistakes as a father. And I finally passed out. And yet my assumed death was not to be. I woke to find myself in the white glow of a hospital room, my hand held tightly by my daughter, who slept in a chair next to my bed. The doctor who attended to me said that I'd suffered another heart attack, but one which was not as severe as the last, and while I was to take it easy, with some therapy I would recover. The police were keen to speak with me. I gave them my account of what had occurred, and they in turn told me all they knew. My unconscious body had been discovered next to a main road just outside of Blackwood Forest, on the outskirts of the nearest town. The cabin was thoroughly searched and was found in the same condition I'd left it in, the window smashed and the front door locked and barricaded from the inside. There was no trace of Jay or my wife. They simply could not be found. The only evidence that they'd ever been there were the footprints in the mud around the cabin, accompanied by a third, much larger set, which led back, deep, into Blackwood Forest. Well, something that never fails to amaze me about Michael Whitehouse's writing is just the way he just builds and builds atmosphere. It's absolutely drenched in it, in that story. Pretty simple premise, but tense. And what a twist ending. What did you think of that one? Now, that's another classic from about 10 years ago, which for some reason I've only just got around to reading. And of course I was inspired by the response to the one I did a couple of nights ago. So I thought, yes, I have to do this one as well. Well, my dear friends, what did you think of that? Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to share in the comment section below the video? And as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Well, that is it for this evening. Back again very soon, very soon, with something else as equally creepy, I hope. Till the next time, my dear friends, very sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Tonight I have another fantastic one for you, and, as is my tradition, here's a little teaser to get you in the mood. The clear crystal blue sea sparkles beneath the rays of a warm, forgiving sun. Gentle waves roll against the shore, and for a moment it almost feels like paradise. But every time I look across to the water, the memories come flooding back. The screams, the gunfire, the dead who refused to stay dead. In the final months of the Second World War, our isolated island outpost became the site of a nightmare no soldier was prepared for. What began as a routine military assignment quickly descended into chaos when a strange sickness swept through the garrison, transforming men into something monstrous. Zombie outbreak, World War II, Japan. By Taxi Dancer. My name is Todorishi Chensi, and I was a first lieutenant interceptor pilot assigned to the Imperial Japanese Army Air Forces, attached to the 59th Hiko Sentai of the 4th Imperial Japanese Air Army from 1941 to 1943. What I've written here is my account of events which occurred during the Battle of New Britain, and is based on my own memory, fading though it may be, as well as that of my sworn testimony to U.S. Marine Major General William H. Rupertus, shortly after my capture. As I record this, my time on this earth is drawing to a close. The last sands in my hourglass are trickling down quickly. How odd it is that the United States, the country which I had sworn to destroy even at the cost of my own life, would end up being such a blessing to my family and my posterity. During the American occupation of Japan after the war, the Japanese peoples learned a very earth-shattering truth, one that would shake the very foundation of everything we knew about life outside of Japan. That truth was this. The American soldiers occupying Japan after the war were not the brutal monsters we've been told to hate and fear. Now, I'm not so naive as to say that there were not atrocities and rapes which occurred during the occupation, for such things did happen. But those Americans who did them were considered criminals by their own people, and had been treated as such. By contrast, the atrocities and rapes committed by my people over those which we'd briefly conquered were actually condoned by our government, indoctrinated as we were that the conquered and those who surrendered to us were less than human. We feared that the Americans would do to us what we did to the Chinese and the Filipinos and the Europeans and the Australians and the Koreans and every other nation whose people were forced to bow to us. As it turned out, the American general who was in charge of the occupation of Japan, General Douglas MacArthur, had proven to be an honorable man and played a large part in rebuilding Japan after he had defeated us. In 1952, the United States granted Japan its freedom and sovereignty. We'd been given, for lack of a better term, a clean slate. In 1965, only 20 years after hostilities ended with the United States, I retired from the newly formed Japanese Air Self-Defense Forces as a fighter jet instructor. That was also the year that my daughter, Inayusha, married a U.S. Marine fighter pilot and moved to San Diego in California. 10 years later, Inayusha eventually convinced me to move to the United States as my wife had passed away. There was nothing left for me in Japan after my beloved Ryoko passed away, and Inayusha promised that the climate in the States was better for my failing health. Her husband was stationed in Hawaii at the time, and I have lived here on Oahu ever since. It's 2013, and I'm a great-grandfather now as I write this account. I sit on the wide, white-painted concrete deck of my home, built in the hills overlooking the sparkling waters of Pearl Harbor. The clear, crystal blue seas shimmer under the rays of a warm and loving sun. As I watch the waves, I shudder as the memories return. July 28th, 1943. In the skies over New Britain in the South Pacific. I banked my Nakajima Ki-43 fighter, codenamed Oscar by the Americans, to the right and looked out of the canopy of my nimble fighter as the impossibly huge silver American B-29 bomber tumbled out of the sky, both of its starboard engines belching black smoke and fire. Although I had very little regret at having destroyed the bomber, my third in as many months, I could not help but feel some sense of respect at the suicidal bravery of the 11 doomed American bomber crewmen. Their bravery was born of a sense of an eventual Allied victory in the Pacific, and a hope for the greater future of their nation. By contrast, with the loss of our main fleet carriers in the Battle of Midway, and the Americans slowly destroying Japanese bastions across the Pacific in their march to retake the Philippine Islands, our Japanese imperial forces were now literally fighting day by day just to stay alive, trying to delay for as long as possible the eventual invasion of the Japanese homelands. Hope, which had once abounded in the imperial military as Japan scored victory after victory after victory over the Americans, the British and the Australians and the Chinese, the Filipinos and countless others, was now a thing of the past. Hope for the future was almost a foolish notion, and that's what fueled our passions as we knew we were now fighting for the survival of our nation and our children. Oh, how things had changed after only 2 years, when the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces ruled half of the world's oceans, while the American Pacific Fleet's capital ships, the only threat to Japan's dominion over Asia and the Pacific, were reduced to nothing but twisted, blasted wrecks at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, blackening the waters with their leaking oil. Who could possibly have guessed that America's industrial might have rebounded in such a short period of time and manufactured so many tanks, airplanes, and ships? For every battleship that they lost on December 7th, 1941, they created many more. And furthermore, most of those battleships which they'd lost at Pearl Harbor were raised from their graves and made even stronger than before. It seemed to me that for every American long-range bomber that my 59th Hiko Sentai shot down, 10 more of the giant American silver bombers took its place. The days of Japanese air superiority over the battlefields was slowly beginning to slip away as the Americans began fielding newer fighters such as their Army Air Force's P-51 Mustang, and P-38 Lightning, and their Navy F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair. The times when our legendary Japanese fighters, such as the Navy A-6M0 and the Army Ki-43 Oscar, were virtually guaranteed to win in every aerial dogfight, were now a thing of the past. As America's pool of dedicated, motivated, and skillful pilots increased by the week, Japan's roster of trained and experienced pilots, especially in our 59th Hiko Sentai, was diminishing rapidly. However, though Japan had suffered some major setbacks in our engagements with the Americans, we were far from defeated. We were still a very powerful and fanatically dedicated fighting force. The fate of the Pacific was still to be decided. The Emperor had promised that Japan was working on developing weapons and strategies which would turn the tide in the Pacific and hurl the Americans back to their mainland. It was our duty to buy the time for that miracle to occur. I glanced and saw 3 parachutes blossom over the stricken B-29, wondering at the miracle of how these 3 crew could have escaped from the tumbling bomber. If the will to survive is strong enough, one will find a way. I pulled away, looking for another victim to strike. I didn't have to scan for long, as the sky literally glittered with the American silver bombers. Normally, we would have attacked this formation with as many as 25 to 40 fighters, but attrition and combat losses had reduced our attacking force to only 18 fighters. Our biggest problem wasn't that we were not being supplied with the adequate number of fighter planes, but that we were not being supplied with the adequate number of trained fighter pilots. These inexperienced boys were being killed off by the more experienced and vengeful American fighter pilots faster than they could be replaced. With the B-29 bombers bristling with machine guns, and with American interceptors prowling around every cloud bank, a Attacking a bomber formation was a dicey prospect indeed. If we had the advantage, we could make as many as 3 attack passes in a bomber formation, 4 if we were lucky and 5 if we were suicidal. I spotted another bomber to my 11 o'clock high and rolled to come from underneath its 6 o'clock position. However, as I rolled, my fighter shuddered from dozens of machine gun rounds impacting on my left wing and fuselage. An American fighter had gotten on my tail unnoticed and hammered my fighter with such a barrage of fire that my plane would soon be shredded to pieces. I was tired, having flown sorties every day for weeks and living on a diet of strong tea, rice, cigarettes, and very little sleep. That was not an excuse for me to have been so careless, as so many of my comrades fighting on the ground were surviving on much less. By sheer dumb luck, I rolled my plane to the left just as the American fighter pilot fired, which caused him to hit the left part of my fighter instead of walking his machine gun rounds up the center of my fuselage, which, doubtless, would have killed me instantly. Still, the American pilot's rounds were fatal to my fighter, and as my burning Oscar flipped over to spiral into the shimmering blue waves of the Pacific below, I opened the canopy and allowed myself to fall out, feeling something tug and rip from my uniform. Hanging suspended under my parachute canopy, I watched as the American fighter, which shot me down, bank away to hunt for more of my comrades. It was one of the Americans' big long-range fighters with a very unusual twin-engine design attached to twin-tail booms. Though ungainly looking, the fighter was very fast and maneuverable and mounted 4 heavy machine guns in the nose. The P-38 Lightning fighter that shot me down was silver, with red painted wingtips and propeller noses. American pilots were prone to paint unique nose art on their fighters, and this one was no exception. A beautiful picture of a smiling Caucasian young lady with wavy red hair adorned the nose of the deadly fighter, the name Marge painted in red letters beside the portrait. I shuddered as I saw the fighter vanish up into a cloud. And we were warned that that particular P-38 Lightning aircraft was flying against us here in New Britain. On July 28, 1943, the day that I officially became an Imperial Japanese fighter ace, I was shot down by Major Richard Ira Bong, the United States' top-scoring fighter ace of the entire war. The sparkling waters of the Pacific spread out beneath me as I slowly descended, a swirling, raging dogfight between desperate and courageous young men being waged above me. One B-29 bomber was on fire and slowly dropping out of its formation, but 2 fighters of my Sentai were also aflame and spiraling towards the ocean. To my shame, I remember secretly hoping that the 2 pilots we lost were not our experienced pilots, as their veteran combat experience was more valuable to us than the lives of the new boys. I looked down as the waters rushed up to greet me. Behind me was the crescent-shaped island of New Britain, about 5 miles to the south. The B-29 bombers had done quite a number on our main base at Rabaul, and even at this distance I could see the plumes of explosions from their bombs and the secondary explosions of our munitions going up in blossoms of black smoke. However, our defences and entrenchments had been very well made, and our forces had dug in deep. It would take many more costly strikes by the Americans in order to put a dent in our operations, and it was our hope that the attrition in American bomber crews would give us the breathing space that we needed to launch a counter-offensive. A chain of islands north of New Britain came into view as I descended below a thin cloud bank. I drifted towards one of the bigger islands. The island was covered in thick jungle, spotted by sharp, rocky ledges, and I could see colonies of seabirds roosting on the cliffs on the eastern side of the island. Well, my heart leapt as I saw structures and signs of a camouflaged encampment on a hill on the western side of the island. Surely it was a Japanese base camp, as there was no known American or Allied bases operating in this area, although I was not aware that we had established an outpost on this island. More than likely, because of the extensive camouflage used to hide it from our Allied air attack, it was probably one of our observation and listening posts, used to give early warning to our command in Rabaul of an Allied amphibious assault on New Britain. And as luck would have it, the tropical winds were pushing me eastwards, away from the island and back over the water. I did not want to risk being dragged too far from the shore, so at about 100 meters from the beach and 30 meters above the waves, I released the harness to my parachute and allowed myself to plunge into the water. I hit the warm waters feet first and immediately became disoriented, not knowing how far I had sunk into the ocean. We'd been told to look at the direction in which the bubbles were going in order to determine which way was up, but that was an easy thing to say. It's much harder when you are flailing around under the water and there are bubbles everywhere. I was never a particularly good swimmer, never liked being submerged in dark waters, especially waters known to be infested with the sharks. Fortunately, I was wearing a life vest, and despite my best efforts to accidentally drown myself, this life vest pulled me to the surface of the water. Though I was tired from many weeks of lack of sleep and lack of decent food, and probably still in shock at having been shot down so quickly, I somehow found the energy to swim, paddle, and drag myself onto the beach. Thoughts of monstrous sharks stalking underneath and behind me motivating my weary muscles. My legs ached as if on fire when my feet finally touched the sandy beach, but they held me aloft just long enough for me to walk a few steps towards where the sand was white, warm, and dry before giving out. I fell face first on that sun-baked beach, exhausted but happy to be alive. I do not know how long I allowed myself to rest there, covered now from head to foot in gritty white sand, but the sun was still high in the clear blue sky when my brain awakened me and told me that it was time to press on. Light-headed and dizzy, I walked back into the shallows, washing the sand from my face, hair, and uniform. I took stock of what provisions I had with me: water, a compass, a signal mirror, and a survival knife. To my dismay, however, I'd lost my pistol, which was in a holster that had been ripped away when I fell out of the cockpit. I contemplated briefly about resting under the shades of the palm trees, which grew around the beach, tempted as I was to perhaps get a few hours of sleep before I made my way across the island to our encampment on the western part. But my Sentai was already short on experienced pilots, and allowing myself even an hour of sleep while my comrades were in desperate need of pilots would be inexcusable. I'd have to navigate towards the south, as the cliffs which lined the northern end of the beach were high and impassable. Once I found a path off the beach, my plan was to steadily move westwards toward the hill where I saw our observation post. I estimated that it was about 3 miles west of my current location, but my detour around the cliffs would probably add another mile or more to the journey. Coupled with navigating the unknown jungle terrain, I could be at our base before nightfall if all went well. If fortune smiled upon me, they would have a radio and I could be back to my airbase in Rabaul as early as tomorrow. Before setting off, I took out my canteen and took a drink of the fresh, lukewarm water. Not realizing how thirsty I'd become, I'd finished half the canteen before I took it from my lips. Feeling more refreshed and confident that I'd run across a stream of some sort to refill my water supply, I set off to the south and plunged into the thick jungle. I immediately became aware of the most oppressive humidity that hung in the air, which made breathing somewhat difficult. Realizing that I was still wearing my life vest, I removed the heavy covering and placed it over a fallen palm tree, intending to retrieve it later on after I'd been rescued. I removed the top part of my pilot uniform, tying it around my waist with the sleeves. Then I took the white kerchief from my neck and tied it around my forehead to keep the sweat from pouring into my eyes. Keeping only my water, knife, compass, and signal mirror, I pressed on deeper into the sweltering jungle. The canopy of leaves overhead cast everything in a dim grey-green hue, hiding the rays of the sun but trapping the hot air near the ground like a sauna. The jungle was alive with the sounds of life. Chittering monkeys, insects buzzing. The call of strange birds echoed throughout a jungle canopy which seemed to envelop me in a lush green embrace. I pushed onwards, feeling as if I were now drowning in a sea of intense green foliage. I looked around for a trail which may lead to a water source and eventually stumbled upon a narrow one, perhaps made by the wild boar which inhabited these islands. Weary also of the many species of venomous snakes which crawled through the underbrush, I followed the trail until the trees began to thin out slightly, and I could just see a line of hills in the distance looming over the jungle floor. I could hear the sound of water splashing, hidden somewhere beyond my weary and sweat-soaked vision as I stumbled forwards again. The trail emerged in a clearing where I was met by a tragic but not unexpected sight. A decaying twin-engine aircraft had met its final resting place here in this forgotten jungle island. Both wings and tail had been torn away by either machine gun fire or by the unforgiving jungle into which it had crashed, but the fuselage had remained relatively intact. It was an Australian Lockheed Hudson light bomber, which we'd no doubt shot down when our forces soundly defeated the Australians in January of last year. A large glass turret bubble was mounted on the top of the fuselage near the rear of the bomber, which was thoroughly shot up. The twin machine guns bowed and rusting in defeat. The door behind the wing was hanging ajar, so, with a sense of morbid curiosity, I cautiously crept inside. There was a heavy scent of must and mold within the carcass of the wreckage as I climbed inside, watchful of any snakes or giant venomous spiders or insects which may have made this wreck their new home. The body of the long-dead Australian turret gunner still sat in his seat, dead arms raised over an emaciated skull as if trying to protect himself from the hail of bullets which had killed him. The thin metal creaked under my boots as I turned to walk towards the cockpit. The fetid smell of decay hung in the humid air as I approached the pilot seat. The cockpit glass shattered away. From behind, I could see the pilot sitting slumped over in the seat, and I stopped, wondering if it was worth going any further. Suddenly I heard a noise, as if a body was shuffling, coming from in front and under the cockpit where the glassed-in nose was located. That was the position where the bombardier was stationed, and I hesitated, fearing that some unseen jungle predator was making a meal of the rancid corpse of this unfortunate airman. And that was when the head of the pilot turned to me, looking over its shoulder and staring at me with malevolent, empty eye sockets. His mouldy skeletal arms reached out to me, but his seat restraints held him in place. Too shocked to breathe, much less scream, I saw a second skeletal hand reach up from the bombardier's position, while behind me, the turret gunner's legs started swinging wildly in its seat. Part 2. I bounded out of the door and ran across the clearing, not daring to look back at what was making the scratching and clawing noises from inside the bowels of that cursed bomber. The clearing was relatively open of any obstructing trees and foliage, and, not paying any attention to the direction I was going, I simply took the path of least resistance as I dove headlong through the jungle. Vines, thorns, and branches clawed at my legs, arms, and face as I desperately fought to put distance between me and the unholy horror which I'd just witnessed. The path led towards the sound of the splashing water, and as I ran, I stepped across an embankment hidden by the jungle undergrowth. I tumbled head over heels down a hill, grabbing roots and vines, and saw bladed grass until I rolled out from under the jungle canopy and came out into the light of another part of the beach. Looking out towards the ocean, I saw a community of thatch-roofed huts built on stilts over the bright blue waters, each dwelling connected by wooden bridges. I had no time to take in the idyllic, tropical paradise that I was seeing as I scrambled back up the embankment which I just tumbled down, cautiously peering behind me to see if I'd been followed. An empty trail and an empty jungle stared back at me. I slid back down the embankment and shuffled towards a palm tree and sat down, resting with my back to the jungle and facing the beach and the community of thatch huts built over the shallow blue waves. It was, admittedly, a calming and beautiful view, with the warm winds blowing, the blue waters dancing, and the small community of huts seemingly existing without a care in the world. It was as if the war had not touched this little stretch of beach. Well, it had to have been my imagination. A trick of the light. The unstable aircraft shifting because of my added weight. The humid jungle breeze blowing through the holes in the bullet-ridden fuselage. Oh, dehydration, or perhaps even a concussion from when I'd bailed out of my plane. Any one of these things could easily explain what I'd seen inside that long-dead bomber. The dead could not simply come back to life. It just wasn't possible. Well, I don't know for how long I sat there, slumped underneath the shade of the palm tree. The warm winds and the gentle lullaby of the waves crashing to shore had lulled me into a fitful sleep. I awoke with a start. Dreams of screaming bombers and fighters falling out of the sky in flames, and of some unseen horror stalking ever closer to me from the shadows. I jumped up, disoriented and waving my knife at monsters that weren't there. It was still daylight, although the sun had sunk closer to the seas now. Flies and other insects buzzed around my sweating face and neck, reminding me of the dream I had of buzzing fighter planes fighting and dying over the skies of New Britain. And the other thing, the horrific vision that I saw inside that long-dead bomber, perhaps that was a dream as well. Suddenly feeling dizzy, I drank almost the entire supply of water left in my canteen. It was time to be moving again. I stared once more at the small community of thatch huts, about 5 or 6 of them built on stilts over the crystal blue waters. Strangely, the community seemed completely abandoned, although I could clearly see several dugout canoes tied to the posts underneath the huts. Hoping to find some fresh water and supplies for perhaps a little food, I decided to spare a few minutes to investigate the tranquil-looking little fishing community before setting off again into the jungle. Oh, how I wish that I didn't. As I walked down the beach, I could see that the community of thatch huts wasn't as tranquil or as peaceful as it looked in the distance. The sides of 4 of the huts looked to have been torn open from the outside and in. Wooden dishes and bowls were scattered about, and strings of dried fish hung rotting and uneaten in strings. The smell of rotten and decaying fish mixed with the buzzing sounds of flies. And there was also another scent, one that I knew too well. Against my better judgment, I walked upon the wooden planks which led from the shore up to the huts over the water, the scent of rotten death getting stronger with each step. I stopped. Inside, I could see a body. A girl. She was laying face down, her arms splayed out before her. From her waist down, the flesh was torn away, as if flayed away by some ravenous beast, exposing bones. Flies and maggots crawled all over the exposed, rotting meat. And then it, whatever the thing had become, lifted her head and moaned. It crawled towards me, grabbing hungrily. I turned and ran. I ran as quickly as I could down the way I'd come and back into the jungle with energy that I didn't know I had. Don't know how far I ran or for how long, nor did I know that I was screaming until I ran through a stream running with cold water and emerged into another clearing. The nightmare didn't end there, though. In the middle of the clearing was a dingy white parachute draped over some branches to form a makeshift shelter. Underneath the shade, there were 2 Americans wearing the uniform of bomber pilots. They were 2 of the Americans who'd survived the bomber which I'd shot down. They were struggling on the ground, vainly trying to fend off 6 undead things which were methodically and cruelly tearing them apart. More of the undead, all wearing Japanese army uniforms, emerged from the jungle to join in the feast as the Americans stopped struggling. "Oh, you fucking savages!" came a yell from behind me. I felt a hard hit to the back of my neck and I fell to the ground, vaguely aware of another big American wearing a bomber crew uniform standing over me. "What the hell are you people doing?" he yelled again, and the undead looked towards us. The American clenched his fists. "You get away from them! You get away from my crew!" No, I yelled as I wrapped my arms around the waist of the big American, pulling him backwards away from the gore-soaked comrades. "They're dead. They're dead. If they catch you, they'll kill you too." The American swung his elbow backwards, catching me in the jaw and knocking me down. He stared down at me with a mixture of hatred and anger and shock at the fact that I'd spoken to him in English. I was on my back, kicking my knees and scrambling backwards over the fallen leaves while pointing behind the angry American. "Watch out! They're behind you!" Confused, but with murderous intent in his eyes, the American clenched his fists and stalked towards me as I turned to get on my feet. Suddenly, somewhere off to my left came the screams of panicked men, followed by the sound of rifles firing. The voices were Japanese. Without turning, I raced back down the embankment and fought through the trees and tangled vines as I pushed to get through to where I'd hurt my comrades. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of branches breaking and underbrush crunching. I ran faster, not knowing if it was the American chasing me or the unholy ghouls which had suddenly come to life and had a hunger for living flesh. My mind was racing as fast as my feet, trying to come to terms with what was going on. This was madness. Did I actually die when I was shut down? Had I been condemned to this hell? A small rise came up before me, a line of trees and thick leafy shrubs separating me from my comrades on the other side. I leapt up the rise, thankful that I could hear many Japanese voices on the other side. And something pulled me down from behind, strong arms pinning me while a thick hand covered my mouth. I was dragged to a half-sitting position on the ground behind the trunk of a thick palm tree. "Sorry," said the American. "You're not giving my position away to your buddies." Well, I struggled to break free, but realized it was hopeless. He could break my neck if he wished. I could feel his heavy breath on the back of my neck as we both lay on the ground, looking up from under the bushes at what was going on at the other side. Perhaps only 5 meters away, I could see the booted feet of about 6 or 7 Japanese infantrymen shouting and firing at some unseen thing in the distance. They were in another shallow clearing about 10 meters in diameter, surrounded by thick vegetation, and the soldiers were clearly in a panicked state. Suddenly, the sounds of moaning, like a harsh wind bellowing through a grave, began to echo across the clearing. The battle was brief and hopeless, as the Japanese infantrymen fired desperately as about 20 of the undead shambled out of the bush, the unholy monsters wearing Japanese army uniforms, as well as others who wore uniforms of long-dead Australian and American servicemen. More of the ghouls emerged behind the surrounded Japanese soldiers, and soon they were overwhelmed. I shut my eyes tightly as I heard the living Japanese soldiers screaming and pleading for several long and agonizing minutes. I wanted to cover my ears and cry as I heard the sound of flesh being ripped and chewed, but I was terrified that my breathing would attract those things. Soon, the screaming ended, replaced by tortured moaning. We remained motionless under those bushes as the sound of shambling feet from the opposite side of the embankment slowly faded. The American relaxed his grip on my collar, but did not release me. "What the hell is going on here?" he hissed. I shook my head. I don't know." "How the hell did you learn to speak English?" the American said. "My father worked at the consulate in London," I said. "I lived in England for 5 years before the war." He released me and pushed me backwards. I lost my balance and fell. The American put his hands on his hips and turned back in the direction that we'd just run. "What the hell did I just see back there? Those things ate your buddies. They ate my friends. What the hell is going on here?" I don't know what is going on here," I said. I got up and slowly, pulling my knife from its sheath and contemplating attacking the American while his back was turned, said, "I was shut down, same as you. Whatever is going on here, it is a danger to the both of us." I released my grip on the knife and slid it back into its sheath then. "Good move," said the American as he turned to face me again. "If you'd have pulled out that knife, we'd have some serious issues." We stood facing each other, each of us unsure whether the other man was a threat. The American stood over 2 meters tall, big with broad shoulders, tan skin, and dirty brown hair. He was unarmed and his hands were down by his side, but he looked at me as if daring me to unsheath my knife. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked. "I am Lieutenant Todorishi Shinsi of the 59th Fighter Air Squadron. You?" "Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, flight engineer, 17th Bombardment Squadron." "Well, it appears, Lieutenant Gabriel," I said, "that we are in somewhat of a difficult situation. I believe that if we are to get off this island alive, it would be better if we put aside our personal differences for now. But if you call me that name one more time, we will, as you say, have some serious issues." Lieutenant Gabriel grunted. "God, are you little slanty-eyed people so long-winded?" He turned suddenly as the sounds of moaning began echoing through the trees, followed by the sound of brush being crushed under many booted feet. "Quickly," I said. "This way." I ran westwards, following the direction of the sun overhead. I could hear the American following close behind me as, all around us, we could see shadows moving through the trees and heard the haggard wailing of tortured voices. We moved away from the shadows, taking our steps more slowly and quietly. Every once in a while, we'd stop and listen to the jungle around us before getting up and proceeding deeper into the jungle. Soon we stopped again, crouching down to listen. To our left and ahead of us, we could hear the bubbling sounds of flowing water, and we cautiously followed the noise to its source. We emerged at a drop-off where a wide stream of clear water flowed. On the opposite side, the jungle rose steeply upwards. We followed the bank upstream for a while, until we found a place where the ground dipped and formed a narrow bank. Making sure that there were no threats around us, the American and I stepped out on the shaded bank, which was covered in smooth, round stones. The rapidly flowing stream was only knee-deep, and the water was refreshingly cold. I emptied my canteen of now warm water and refilled it with water from the stream and drank my fill. Beside me, Gabriel knelt and cupped his hands in the water, washing the sweat and dirt from his face. I handed him my canteen, and he accepted it gratefully. A fairly large, moss-covered boulder lay in the stony bank near the water, and we rested with our backs against it, warily keeping our eyes and ears alert to the sounds of any threats which might suddenly emerge from the jungle. "Hey, why are we headed west, Chancy?" asked Gabriel above the noise of the flowing stream. He refilled my empty canteen with the cold water and handed it back to me. "I saw an observation post on a hill to our west when I parachuted here," I answered, taking another gulp of water. "Well, I don't know if you've noticed," said Gabriel, "but west seems to be where those things are coming from." "I know," I replied, "but there's bound to be a radio at the outpost. It's the only way we can call for help." Gabriel leaned back against the rock, the obvious question left unanswered. If we managed to avoid those things and made it to the outpost, and if I were able to call for help, then the best that Lieutenant Gabriel could hope for was to spend the rest of the war as a POW. I didn't think that suited the big American, and fully expected him to take some kind of action to avoid that fate. I would do the same had the situation been reversed. Yes, I'd have to keep an eye on him. Part 3. I woke up with Gabriel's big hand wrapped around my mouth and nose, his other hand on the hilt of my knife. My eyes went wide as I looked around. The sun had dipped below the hill opposite of us. How long had I been asleep? How stupid could I have been? He was behind me, and I struggled to release Gabriel's grip on my knife. "Shh," he whispered. "Jesus, Chancy. Your snores could wake the dead." He slowly took his hand from my mouth and pointed around the boulder towards the opposite bank of the stream. "Movement," he whispered. I nodded as he released me, and we silently crawled to the edge of the boulder. As we peered around, a high-pitched grunt suddenly filled the air as a wild boar emerged from the jungle and splashed into the water a few meters away from us. Initially, it ran in our direction, but upon seeing us, the terrified creature turned and ran in the opposite direction down the stream. Behind it, several undead creatures clawed their way from the foliage and clumsily shambled into the water, turning in the direction of the squealing animal. 4 of the bloody gore-soaked creatures wore the uniform of Japanese soldiers. A 5th undead creature, also Japanese, wore a torn, white lab coat now stained red with blood and entrails. The last 3 walking corpses were Caucasians, 2 wearing the uniform of American soldiers and 1 wearing the uniform of an Australian. They seemed to have been deceased for longer than the Japanese, as their skin was more taut and decayed and their uniforms were more ragged and torn. One of them stumbled and fell into the water, the flailing corpse being dragged downstream. I held my breath as I watched the corpses shamble away from us. We didn't move for several more minutes, waiting to see what other nightmares would emerge from the opposite bank. After a while, Gabriel nudged me. "Hey, let's go find that observation post of yours before the sun goes down." Nodding, I cautiously stood up and began wading towards the opposite bank, careful to avoid the spot where the undead creatures had emerged. Gabriel slipped several of the smooth round stones into his pocket and followed me. Soon we were again embraced by the jungle, and painfully aware that our chances for encountering more of those things increased with every step we took towards the outpost. My mind was racing. Were those dead Japanese soldiers from the outpost? Was there anyone still alive there? Why was there a corpse wearing a laboratory coat? Why were there Allied soldiers amongst the walking dead? We were making slow progress as the terrain began to slope upwards, but fortunately we didn't encounter any more of those things. There was a clearing at the top of the hill, which then ran down into a shallow valley. We laboriously climbed to the top of the hill, slowing near the top as the fetid stench of death wafted through the air. The American and I emerged once again in a clearing surrounded by trees. Leaning with its back against a tree was the partially devoured body of a Japanese soldier, a pistol in his hand and a hole in the back of his head. Flies, ants, and other insects covered the corpse's head and exposed entrails. "He wears the rank of a colonel," I said. "Why would a senior army officer be here where there's only a small secluded outpost?" Why didn't he rise like the others?" asked Gabriel. "Perhaps it's because he shot himself in the head," I speculated. Gabriel walked towards the corpse, staring doubtfully at it for a moment before suddenly reaching down and prying the pistol from its hand. Seeing the empty chamber, he tossed it back down. "Well, looks like he saved the last bullet for himself," he said in a disappointed tone. "The outpost is close," I replied. "Where?" asked Gabriel. I pointed to the top of a ridgeline which was over the next rise, where camouflage netting blended seamlessly with the trees. Gabriel squinted his eyes. "Do you see it?" "Yeah," Gabriel replied. "Looks like it's built directly into the side of the hill. More like a bunker complex rather than a simple observation post to me." I nodded in agreement. The bunker complex, as Gabriel called it, was constructed on a wide and flat ledge just below the crest of the hill, with what appeared to be structures acting as entrances leading into the hill itself. Radio antennae, which could easily be mistaken for tree branches, stuck up through the top of the camouflage netting. At least we knew they had at least one radio in there. A clearing surrounded the bunker complex of about 100 meters before the perimeter ended at the jungle once again. There was no movement that I could see, the bunker complex looking as quiet and tranquil as the huts built over the waves. I shuddered with dread. "We should go," I said. The sun was dropping rapidly as we ducked down as low as we could and scrambled across the open field before diving into an open, fighting defensive position. In the foxhole were puddles of drying blood and scraps of torn flesh. There was also a light machine gun in the fighting position, strangely pointing back in the direction of the bunker complex. Lieutenant Gabriel made to take the weapon, but I stopped him. "No, Lieutenant," I said. "I believe that they are attracted to the noise. If we should fire that, we will attract them back towards us. We would be better off if we relied more on stealth." The American regarded me doubtfully, and then nodded, putting the machine gun back down. We silently crept the rest of the way to the main gate, which had looked to have been pushed violently open. The guard tower at the gate had been abandoned, blood staining the sandbags which surrounded it. The sun had dipped just below the horizon, and long black shadows swallowed the complex. From the corners of my eyes, I could see shadows shambling around the perimeter of the base. Making sure that the guard tower was empty, we silently made our way up and very quietly shut the door of the shack. "There's the radio room," I said, pointing to a set of stone steps which led up to a wooden shack with heavily sandbagged sides, nestled almost comfortably under camouflage netting. It was located near a strand of palm trees at the edge of the bunker complex, just outside the entrance which led into the hill. "We should be able to get in there and call for help." As the light slowly faded, I could see the shadows on Gabriel's face. By the look of him, I knew that we were thinking the same thing. "We need to find out what the hell's happening," said Gabriel. "We need to find out what the hell your people are doing here. The only way we're going to do that is to go into that bunker." "I know," I nodded. "We'll have a better chance to get around at night." Slowly we climbed down from the guard tower and made our way to the bunker entrance, sneaking around some makeshift thatch huts which we assumed had been used as living quarters for the soldiers. On more than one occasion we almost ran into a ghoul randomly shambling about, moaning and stinking. We took shelter inside one of the abandoned huts and peered out of the open window towards the entrance of the bunker, which led into the depths of the mountain. It was blanketed in total blackness. "Come on, Chancy," whispered Gabriel. We crept around the corner of the shack and I grabbed the American before we made our final dash to the entrance. "Gabriel, do you still have those rocks?" He stopped and then nodded. Reaching into his pockets, he took out 2 good-sized rocks. He threw one into the concrete blast wall which lined the entrance of the bunker, and the crack noise it made echoed dully. We waited a couple of tense seconds and were rewarded when a dull moan emerged from the shadows, followed by an undead soldier appearing from the shadows. Gabriel took his second stone and tossed it on the stone steps which led up to the radio room. The ghoul turned its head, then followed the sound of the stone clacking. After waiting a few more seconds, we ran into the pitch-black entrance. We found ourselves in a surprisingly wide hallway lined with heavy wooden planks which was angled downwards deeper into the mountain. More surprisingly, the emergency lighting was still working, and the depths of the bunker were bathed in a dim red, as if we were descending into the mouth of hell itself. We walked slowly down the ramp, our ears open for any threatening noises. The dim red lights only pierced a few feet in either direction, and we came upon a T-junction, one hallway disappearing right, one left. "What should we be looking for, Chancy?" whispered Gabriel. "I don't know," I answered. "Where is the thing we're looking for?" he said. "Your guess is as good as mine," I replied. "Good that you know what you're doing," he muttered. To our right, somewhere in the dark, we could hear shambling and moaning. "Left," I said. "Sounds good," Gabriel returned. We followed the dim red lights down the corridor which ended at another junction. The left passage was narrow and unlit, so we decided to take the larger passageway to the right, which was still illuminated by the eerie red lights. As we made our way down the corridor, my feet slipped on something metallic. Reaching down, I could feel that the floor was carpeted with spent ammunition casings. "There was a battle here," I said. "Doesn't look like your guys won," answered Gabriel. We moved forwards down the corridor and were surprised to find that it ended in a huge room filled with what looked to be Mad Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. Now, I am not a scientist, so I cannot begin to explain what kinds of machines and instruments that we saw, outside of the usual beakers and test tubes and burners that one might find in a science classroom. But the entire underground laboratory, which looked to easily be 50 feet square, had been completely demolished, as if a struggle had indeed taken place. Lab equipment had been knocked over, bullet holes pockmarked the walls, and everywhere was the stench of blood and rotting flesh. Several wooden tables also littered the floor, and papers were strewn everywhere. Gabriel picked up a handful of them and walked underneath one of the red lights. "Hey, Chancy," he said. "Can you read Japanese?" I took the papers from him. "Yeah, what does it say?" he asked. I looked at the writing and shook my head. "I don't know. It's equations and formulas and test results for some experiments which they seem to be doing on Allied soldiers. I can't make head nor tail of this, but some of the information keeps referring to transcribing the results into a master book." "Hang on," said Gabriel as he reached down under an overturned table. He pulled out a thick black book bound in black leather. "Something like this," he said as he handed it to me. I said, reading the handwritten notes in the thick journal. "What is it, Chancy?" asked Lieutenant Gabriel. "This was written by Dr. Kanazaki Hitaroshi. He is a noted biophysicist and botanist in Japan. Rumors say he is working with the military on a top-secret military project that's supposed to increase Japan's fighting strength exponentially." Lieutenant Gabriel looked over my shoulder as I read the title of the journal. It says, Operation Divine Warrior. The first entry is dated just 3 months ago. "So, your Dr. Hidoroshi was experimenting on ways to bring dead soldiers back to life," shuddered Gabriel. "That's unholy." "This is the sign of a desperate nation, I'm afraid," I said. "The dead attack anybody. They have no national loyalties. they simply kill and create more of their kind. This cannot stand. You mentioned something about captured Allied soldiers, said Gabriel. Does that journal say where they're kept? I flipped through the pages. Yes, here it is. Dr. Hitaroshi says that Allied soldiers, both living and deceased, were brought here 20 at a time and that they were kept in a room. Right over there. I pointed to another door which led to an adjoining room. We walked across the laboratory towards the other room, the stench of rot and death growing stronger. 6 of the emergency lights still operated, and what greeted us filled me with shock, terror, and disgust. Within the room were 20 wooden beds lined up in 2 rows. On each bed a corpse of an Allied service member was securely strapped by leather restraints. They lay motionless. Gabriel silently walked inside and stopped at the beds of 2 corpses. They wore American flight uniforms. I knew these men, he whispered. Their bomber went down almost a month ago. I'm sorry, Lieutenant Gabriel, I replied. Hey, look here, Gabriel said. You said that 20 of them were kept here, but this bed is empty. He pointed to the empty bed next to his 2 fallen comrades. The leather restraints have broken loose from the bed, I noticed. Well, one of them got free, concluded Gabriel. One of them got free and spread whatever this was to the entire bunker complex. It was at that moment that I stepped on another pile of spent rifle casings. This time, as I fell, I attempted to catch myself on the edge of the empty bed, which screeched as I leaned heavily against it. The sound seemed to echo across the universe. Gabriel's dead companion opened his eyes and attempted to rise, moaning loudly. The others also awoke and began moaning and gnashing their teeth, trying desperately to get up and bite at us. The racket of their banging and kicking against their restraints broke the silence of the tomb-like bunker complex. God damn it, yelled Gabriel. Thought you were supposed to be freaking ninjas. What the hell is a ninja? I yelled as we ran from the laboratory, Dr. Hitaroshi's journal clasped in my hands. We retreated back the way we came, turning the corner to hear the groaning growing louder. In the distance, we could see shambling shapes moving in the red light. Between us was the ramp which led back to the entrance of this accursed bunker. We raced towards the ramp and towards the undead coming down the opposite corridor, and we reached it just about the same time. I came face to face with the rotting vestige of 4 of the undead just an arm's length away from me, with many more behind them. I turned and ran up the ramp, Gabriel close behind me and pushing me forward. Halfway up the ramp, Gabriel turned and kicked the nearest undead ghoul in the chest, who fell backwards, knocking our pursuers back down the ramp. The few moments he bought allowed us to race up the ramp and into the welcome darkness of night. Once outside, Gabriel yelled, "Get up to the radio room." "I know," I yelled, turning left and running towards the stone steps. The undead soldier from earlier was still there, his back turned to me. I jumped up and kicked it aside, and the ghoul tumbled over into the dark. "Yeah, ninjas," I heard Gabriel mutter. "They're all fucking ninjas." I practically flew up the stone steps to the radio room. "What is this ninja, Round Eye?" I whispered. Strangely, the radio room was empty. Apparently whatever tragedy that befell this place happened so quickly that no one was able to get a radio message outside the island. It was small, no more than 2 meters by 3 meters, and contained 2 small stools and a table placed under a glass window. I quietly closed the heavy wooden door shut behind me and timidly poked my head above the open window as hundreds of the undead poured from the mouth of the entrance of the bunker. Shuddering, I crept to the makeshift table on which the radio set was placed. Grabbing the handset, I tuned the radio to the frequency which I knew that my unit back at Raboul would be monitoring when, suddenly, I froze. I looked up to see Gabriel staring at me with his fists clenched, suspicion blazing in his eyes. I stared back at him, not knowing what brought about this renewed display of aggression. It took me a second to realize why. If I called back to my people, and if they came, the chances would be very good that Dr. Hitaroshi's unholy experiments would continue, and more than likely a captured Lieutenant Gabriel will be added as one of the test subjects. The nightmarish abominations which were created here must not be allowed to escape from this cursed place. Nodding in understanding, I turned over the handset to Gabriel. "Call your people, Lieutenant," I said. "This place and everything in it must be destroyed. Nothing here must be set free." Part 4. Lieutenant Gabriel relaxed and nodded, taking the radio handset from me. "Yeah, show me how to work this thing," he said. I guided him through the process of searching frequencies on our radio, and he began transmitting over an open Allied channel. "Any station, this is net. Any station, this net. Any station, this net. This is Flight Engineer Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, United States Army Air Force." He repeated this for several minutes, switching frequencies on the radio. Well, this was risky, as Japanese radio operators could have intercepted these transmissions, but at the moment we had little choice. "Any station, this is net. This is Flight Engineer Lieutenant Samson Gabriel, United States Army Air Force." Suddenly a voice on the other end of the radio said, "Hello, Lieutenant Gabriel. Please state your identification number, your unit, and your current location." The person on the other end had an Australian accent. Gabriel gave him all of the information he'd requested, and the Australian voice at the other end told us to wait. After an eternity of waiting, the Australian voice returned. "Hello, Lieutenant Gabriel." The annoyingly cheerful voice came. "We have a platoon of Marine Raiders coming to snatch you up in the morning. Can you be at the beach east of your current position?" "Do I have a fucking choice?" said Gabriel. "No, I suppose not, mate," said the Australian. "We're having a run of trouble with Jap patrols, so I can't give you an exact time. Just stay by your radio and we'll inform you as to when your Marines will be landing in the morning. Till then, mate, hold on and we'll be there as quickly as we can." "Yeah," said Gabriel. "Hurry up." Gabriel out. He replaced the receiver back on the radio holder and exhaled, putting his forehead in the crook of his elbow. I was sitting on the floor of the radio room, my back braced against the door. "Go ahead and grab some sleep, Lieutenant Gabriel," I said. "I'll take the first watch." But he was already snoring silently. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor in the dark, reliving nightmare after nightmare after nightmare, and questioning my beloved Emperor. How could he do this? How could he have approved of this? How could he think that this abomination against nature and against the rulers of the heavens be what is best for Japan? Below us I could hear the shambling of dead feet and the moaning of unholy voices. I don't know how long I sat there, staring out the open window and into space at the beautiful stars above, wondering what mysterious and wonderful secrets they held. I must have drifted off to sleep sometime because, well, sometime later I felt Gabriel shaking my shoulder. "Hey, Chintzy," he whispered. "Grab some sleep. I'll take watch now." "What time is it?" I asked. "About 4:30 in the morning," he answered, without checking his watch. "This is usually the time we get up to start the engines to our bombers." "I see," I replied as I allowed sleep to take me. I screamed the squelch of the radio, followed by the same Australian voice from last night. "Good morning, Lieutenant Gabriel. Are you there?" The moaning below us increased in intensity, and I got up, slowly peering over the edge of the open windows. Hundreds of angry, undead eyes stared back at me from below. Yeah, whispered Gabriel. "Geez, will you pipe down?" "Yeah, sorry, mate," said the Australian, more quietly now. "We have a platoon of Marine Raiders landing at the beach east of your position in about 1 hour. Can you be there? Over." We could hear the sounds of shambling feet begin stumbling up the stone steps to the radio room. "I guess we don't have much of a choice, do we?" said Gabriel. "We'll be there. Just tell them to be ready to get the hell off this damn island." The sun was creeping above the horizon as heavy dead hands pounded on the wooden door. The door shuddered as I pressed my back against it, bracing my legs against the opposite wall. Every time they beat on the door, it opened a little more. Gabriel ran up and placed his bigger and heavier frame against it. Get your skinny ass out of here. You ain't gonna brace this door, he yelled. Get that journal and jump out the window. It's only 10 feet to the ground. What about you? I yelled. Get the hell out of the way when you land, 'cause I'll be right behind you, said Gabriel. I ran to the open window and looked down. The undead ghouls were crowding at the stone steps leading up to the radio room. There were at least 100 of them. The ground below was clear, and climbing to the ledge of the window, I leapt out, bending my knees and rolling to my side as soon as my feet hit the ground. I kept Dr. Hitaroshi's journal clutched in my arms as I jumped up, my knees buckling slightly. I looked up at the open window as Gabriel appeared on the ledge. As he made to jump, one of the undead grabbed a hold of his ankle. Off balance, Gabriel jumped awkwardly and hit both his feet on the stone steps as he fell. I heard a sickening snap as he rolled onto the grass. Shit, Gabriel yelled. He attempted to get up, but fell painfully in a heap. I ran to him and hauled him up on my shoulders, dragging and pulling him forwards towards the main entrance gate. Gabriel attempted to help by half walking and half limping, but I could tell by his grunting and heaving that he was in great pain. Many of the undead followed Gabriel out of the window, falling to the ground in bone-snapping heaps. But many more who had not already entered the radio room had seen us escaping and began shambling after us. By then, however, I'd managed to get Gabriel out of the entrance at the base, and we began stumbling towards the jungle. By the time we were halfway across the open field, Gabriel was screaming in pain with every step, and I was getting weaker, hauling his dead weight practically on my back. You're not gonna make it, Chensey, grunted Gabriel. Not with my big ass weighing your skinny ass down. Shut up, Round Eye, I said as we stumbled past the foxhole he'd discovered earlier. The machine gun was still where we'd left it, facing back towards the bunker. Suddenly, Gabriel pushed himself off me and tumbled to the ground. What are you doing? I yelled. Turning over, his face etched with pain, Gabriel reached into a cargo pocket of his flight suit and pulled out a thick plastic bag. Thrusting it into my hand, he said, Here, Chensey, make sure this gets to my family. Tell my little Samuel that Daddy loves him. He turned and hobbled back to the pit and painfully flopped inside of it. Grabbing the machine gun, he cocked the chamber and began to open fire. Don't be a fool, Gabriel, I yelled. You cannot defeat them all by yourself. There are too many. Get down to the beach, Chensey, Gabriel yelled over his shoulder. Go warn those Marines about what's going on here. Are all you damned Americans so stupidly stubborn? I ran back to the machine gun pit and reached down, hooking my hands around Gabriel's chest, and I hauled him up and out of the hole with a strength I did not know I possessed. What the hell are you doing? Yelled Gabriel. Get the fuck down to the beach, you little shit. I'm not little, you round-eyed son of a bitch. I threw his arm across my shoulder. Besides, I need your dumb baboon ass to get off this island. Those stupid Marines will shoot me if they saw me running towards them alone. Yeah, good point, agreed Gabriel. Now, lean on me and let's go. We had to cover 50 meters of relatively open ground before we made it to the tree line. I'd hoped that we could lose the shambling corpses in the thick vegetation, and we could somehow sneak down to the beach. But Gabriel's legs could not support his weight, try as he might to kick himself along, and he was much bigger and heavier than me. The dead were rapidly closing behind us, maybe on top of us before we reached the tree line. But I wasn't going to leave this man. He was a decent and honorable warrior. I almost killed him in the skies above New Britain, and he was now willing to sacrifice himself to give me a chance to flee. Oh, it would be a disgrace to abandon him, but it would be an honor to stand and die by his side. They're closing on us, he grunted. We're not going to make it, Chensey. I know, I said. Now, shut up. I reached down and grabbed the hilt of my knife. Before I could turn to face the threat, we were both blown off our feet. Heat like the fires of hell erupted behind us as the air was split with explosions and the roar of propeller blades. I rolled over and looked where we'd just come from. The ground had become a roiling sea of flames and black smoke. I couldn't see the undead through the fires and choking smoke caused by the incendiary bombs. Gabriel was lying on the ground next to me on his stomach, breathing heavily. I rolled over him again, hooking my arms around his chest, and began pulling him backwards the last few meters into the tree line. With the last of my strength, I rolled him upright under a shady bush and poured the last of my water over his head. Too weak to even stand, I crawled back to where we'd entered the trees to see if we were still being followed. The entire outpost was ablaze, and dozens of immolated undead creatures shambled aimlessly about in the fires before collapsing in a heap of blackened flesh. Above us, large silver fighter planes with their distinctive twin-tail booms dived at the outpost, dropping the last of their bombs and firing their machine guns at anything that still moved. Major Richard Bong's squadron of P-38 Lightnings had struck again. I believe that the American commander would have thought both me and Lieutenant Gabriel to have been completely insane, each of us having suffered through the trauma of being shot down and then forced to fend for ourselves on a jungle island somewhere in the South Pacific, had it not been for the corroboration of the Marines who'd rescued us and the tales of horror which they'd witnessed and testified to in hushed and terrified tones. I worked tirelessly with US military intelligence, deciphering the journals and notes which we'd taken from the research facility, the American intelligence officers becoming as horrified as I was to learn of the unholy experiments which Dr. Hitaroshi had been conducting on the honored dead Japanese and Allied warriors. 2 days after we'd fully deciphered and transcribed all of Hitaroshi's documents, the Americans completely destroyed all evidence of Operation Divine Warrior in a pit of fire while a force of B-29 bombers was sent to completely obliterate the research facility. The next day, the Americans sent another squadron of B-29 bombers to carpet bomb the island, this time using incendiary bombs. On that day, though I was technically a prisoner of war, the Americans gave me permission to briefly visit Lieutenant Gabriel as he was resting comfortably at a field hospital, both his legs in a cast and elevated above his head. He was awaiting transport to one of the American hospital ships. 3 big MPs stood around the bed, perhaps more for my protection than to protect Lieutenant Gabriel. And it was understandable, as in the eyes of the courageous wounded in that field hospital, I was still the enemy. I sat next to him and retrieved a small plastic bag from my pocket, handing it to Gabriel. "Please take these," I said. "I pray that they carry you home safely to your wife and your family." He smiled, taking out the picture of his son Samuel and his attractive wife, his worn Holy Bible, his dog tags, and his wedding ring. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you come back for me? Why did you help us destroy Hitaroshi's work? Had it come to fruition, it may have changed the fortunes of war in Japan's favor." I sighed. There will come a time in every warrior's life when he must decide whether or not he's doing the right thing, and in that moment his decision is what will separate him from either being a true warrior for good or a mindless monster who does only what he is told. What Hitaroshi was doing was evil, and I pray that your forces were successful in erasing that abomination. This war, like all wars, will eventually end, and either Japan or the Allies will emerge victorious. But if the nightmare on that island were allowed to escape, I fear that we will all be cursed to fight a war between the living and the dead. "Are all Japanese as long-winded as you, Chancy?" smirked Gabriel. He smiled and shook my hand. "Yeah, thank you for coming back for me. You know, that was actually my final mission. I was about to return home to the States when we were shot down." I bowed, realizing that my moment had come to either confess what I'd done or let the secret haunt me forever. "Lieutenant Gabriel," I said, my voice unsure and quivering, "I have a confession to make." "You were the one who shot me down and killed my crew," Gabriel answered matter-of-factly. "I know." "You knew?" I asked. "The entire time that we were together, you knew?" "I knew the second I saw Major Bong shoot you down, and I watched you bail out of your fighter," answered Gabriel. "You had reason to avenge the deaths of your comrades," I said. "Why did you not kill me when you had the chance?" Gabriel shrugged. "Like you said, Chancy, comes a time when you have to decide whether to do what is right or what's wrong. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'll mourn the loss of my friends until the day I die. I'm glad you're alive. hope that you make it back to Japan. They'll need good people like you to help them rebuild and to teach future generations that war is not how to settle our differences." I smiled. "You speak as if your side has already won, my friend." We haven't," said Gabriel. "Not yet." I nodded and stood up, rendering a salute to the brave American warrior. To his credit, Gabriel returned my salute, saying, "When this is all over, maybe we can get a beer." "I would like that, Lieutenant Gabriel." As the three MPs led me back to my holding cell, I knew that I'd never see Lieutenant Sampson Gabriel again. I was eventually transferred to an Australian ship which took me to a POW camp in Queensland, where I remained until the end of the war. It was somewhat of an oddity, as we, Japanese, especially Japanese pilots, were not known for surrendering. Most of us who had been captured were wounded and either did not have the ability to resist capture or the ability to commit seppuku. Eventually, when the war finally ended, I was repatriated back to the Japanese homelands, and the rest, as is so often said, is history. And it is this that I leave for you, my beloved daughter Inayusha, and to my grandsons Haruki and Natsuo, and my beloved granddaughter Noriko, and to my great-grandchildren Reiji and the twins Akiro and Hichiro. Be warriors of light. Be the flame in the dark which inspires hope among those who have none. Be true to these values which I hope I've instilled in you. Be smart, be kind, be brave. Always tell the truth. Have self-respect and, above all, have faith in God. Finally, if you ever see the spectre of evil rise, I pray that, in that moment, you'll choose to be the warrior who fought for what is right, no matter what government which you serve allegiance to. For your honor is not bound by a flag, but by what you've done to serve the greater good. May eternal love be with you and to those of our coming generation who will carry the flame of hope into the future, perhaps even to the stars. Todorishi Chensi, Honolulu, Hawaii, 2013. Ichiro Chensi carefully closed the memoir written so long ago by her great-grandfather and reverently handed it back to her mother, Noriko. "Thank you for letting me read it one more time," said Hichiro to her mother. Ichiro's mother nodded, carefully placing Grandfather Todorishi's handwritten memoir back into a box, which also contained his awards, ribbons, medals, and other memories of a long-forgotten time when the world was at war. Noriko looked at her daughter, the youngest of her 3 children, as Hichiro was born only 2 minutes after her twin brother Akiro. "Are you sure that you want to do this, Hichiro?" She smiled and nodded, hugging her mother. Tomorrow was September 6th, Hichiro's 18th birthday. She only wanted to do one thing to celebrate her birthday, and that was go to the recruiting station as soon as they opened and begin the process of becoming a United States Marine just like her father and his father before him. They sat silently for a while in the large kitchen of the 2-story home which great-grandfather Todorishi had built in Oahu, overlooking the waters of the Pacific Ocean. It was nighttime, and Hichiro walked out onto the wide stone patio, the same patio which great-grandfather dictated his memoirs. She looked up into a night sky brilliant with stars. Carry the flame of hope into the future, and perhaps even to the stars, Hichiro thought. Okay, my dear friends, well, I know I have another zombie Southeast Asia story going on at the moment, the series, but I've been sitting on that one for about 3 years, and it's brilliant, and I apologize for not getting to it sooner. My thanks, as ever, to the wonderful Taxi Dancer for another brilliant story, and to all his great advice. He's given some just incredible advice on what I could do, how to go forward, and what mistakes I should not make. So very, very much appreciated, and I'll be back to that soon as well. Ooh, that is enough for this evening, though. Till the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or two. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.